Novel Empire. Immortal God of Battle. Chapter 301 Blazing Eyes. Wow! The crowd cheered loudly. Chu Yan's manipulation of Yuan Qi continuously brought new surprises to everyone. It was extremely shocking. So far, Chu Yan should be the strongest disciple of the Qi sect, right? The key was that her control of Yuan Qi was complex and changeable. Unlike Jiangyu, she could only condense a halo to bind her enemies. A woman who played with Yuan Qi like this also filled everyone with unlimited yearning for the Hao Ran sect's Qi sect. The radiant battle general standing behind Chu Yan was condensed from Yuan Qi. His height had reached an astonishing 5 meters, which was comparable to Xiang long after his transformation. One had to know that it might be easy to condense a 10-meter-long spear, but it was extremely difficult to condense a human-shaped battle general, because the structure of a battle general was 100 times more complex than a spear, sword, or the like. Not to mention that the battle general was completely dressed in radiant armor, and he was holding a 6-meter-tall saber in his right hand. Oh. This is your trump card. Yi Dong's eyes moved. Chu Yan clutched her hands together and quickly moved her index fingers. Behind her, the gigantic radiant battle general rushed out with a shout, brandishing his Yuan Qi saber. This thing was not a phantom, nor was it a white tiger of Yuan Qi like Hong Bin that could only make simple bite movements. The radiant battle general could do whatever humans could, and it was practically no different from a martial artist. The radiant battle general suddenly rose from the ground amidst the howling charge, and a gigantic saber of light slashed down from the sky. The saber of light carried an unparalleled pressure, pushing both sides of the air apart. Yi Dong threw the black shield into the sky and immediately collided with the giant saber that was convenient for the radiant battle general. Ping! The giant saber in the radiant general's hand was instantly shattered. I got you. Right at this moment, Chu Yan's cold voice appeared behind Yi Dong. Before Yi Dong could turn around, Chu Yan held the Yuan Qi spear in her hand and stabbed it towards Yi Dong's back heart. Good boy. Win. Everyone was ready to cheer. But at this moment, Yi Dong's entire body suddenly disappeared. As for Chu Yan's Yuan Qi spear, it had also pierced through the air. What's going on? Chu Yan was stunned. On the arena not far from Chu Yan, Yi Dong's disappeared figure appeared again. However, the black shield in his hand was gone, and the big eyes above his head had changed. The giant eyeball turned pure white, and its pupils were black. The Eye of Illusion. Yi Dong raised his right hand, which was covered in strange patterns, and said indifferently. Immediately after, his body disappeared, and then he appeared from the same spot again. What the hell is this? The name of that eyeball has changed. Look carefully. Xiang Nan's expression was solemn. Have you discovered the law? Yi Dong's body maintains a certain frequency of light extinction. His body appears for a second, disappears for a second, and circulates like this. Sure enough. Everyone observed carefully and found that it was really the same as what Xiang Nan had said. The large white eyeball above Yi Dong's head also had the same frequency. When the eyeball closed, Yi Dong disappeared, and when the eyeball opened, Yi Dong appeared. At this moment, Chu Yan commanded the radiant battle general to launch an attack, while she herself launched an attack from the other end. The gigantic radiant battle general rushed out with a shout. The broken light saber in its hand condensed again, and it immediately blocked the arena with the huge radiant saber. At the same time, its body charged forward. Ah! Isn't that Xiang Nan's azure dragon going out to sea? Everyone cried out in surprise. Xiang Nan was also stunned. it really is quite similar. Chu Yan was imitating Xiang Nan's azure dragon when she went out to sea. Unfortunately, the azure dragon's going out to sea was a martial skill, not a simple move. Thus, Chu Yan could only simulate a rough shape, but it did not possess the true power of the azure dragons going out to sea. Looking at Yi Dong again, he walked towards the radiant battle general. The moment he was about to be hit by the lightsaber, his body disappeared. On the other hand, Chu Yan mounted the radiant beauty horse and rushed over with a spear in her hand. Thus, Chu Yan and the radiant battle general launched a dazzling and violent offensive against Yi Dong. The attacks of the giant saber and spear slashed back and forth, leaving behind sharp traces of light. It was as if even the air was about to be cut open. However, Yi Dong was like a fish in water amid this storm of attacks, taking a leisurely stroll in the courtyard. His body disappeared in a second and appeared in a second, making it impossible for Chu Yan to grasp the best opportunity to attack. Even if a person existed all the time, it would be very difficult for you to hit him, let alone Yi Dong's state. How long are you going to hide? Chu Yan's yuan qi was being consumed in large quantities. If it weren't for the support of the 5th level origin returning realm, her yuan qi would have been exhausted long ago. I'm sorry, I'm just curious about your martial skill. I want to see more. Since you're anxious to end the battle, then, do as you wish. Yi Dong's body suddenly floated backwards, and both his eyes and his body disappeared at the same time. When he reappeared, he was already standing at the edge of the arena, raising his right hand high up and saying, "Eye of Blaze." Under everyone's gaze, the large white eyeball above Yi Dong's head suddenly closed. When he opened it again, it had already turned into a fiery red eyeball. His eyes seemed to be wrapped in flames. Hiss! What is this thing? Everyone could no longer predict Yi Dong's abilities. Everything they saw today had overturned their understanding of martial arts. Yi Dong raised his right hand and pointed his index finger at Chu Yan. At that instant, Chu Yan's heart started to throb violently. She felt a terrifying death crisis. She subconsciously jumped. At the same time, a beam of flame suddenly shot out from the pupils of the flaming eyes. Z. The beam of flames pressed against the ground and shot into the sky. The strength of the arena that was comparable to an Earth-grade weapon had been swept through a shallow ravine. Damn it! Chu Yan raised her right hand, and the radiant battle general immediately jumped into the sky and dived towards Yi Dong. The 6-meter radiant saber in her hand slashed down longitudinally, carrying a thunderous power. Yi Dong didn't even dodge. He calmly raised his right hand and pointed at the radiant battle general descending from the sky. The flame eyeball suddenly turned, and with a sizzling sound, the flame beam swept towards the radiant battle general, and halved the radiant battle general in half. Yi Dong turned his finger again and pointed at Chu Yan. As Chu Yan flew, she hurriedly pushed her hands forward, and a massive amount of yuan qi gushed out from her body. At the same time, she retracted the light general who had been cut in half in the sky, and used all of her yuan qi to condense a 10-meter tall yuan qi shield in front of her. Z. The flaming light beam swept over, easily cutting open the yuan qi shield and cutting off both of Chu Yan's legs at the same time. I admit defeat. Chu Yan endured the pain and shouted loudly. Z. The moment she shouted out to admit defeat, the beam of flames that had crossed over and chased after her had almost touched Chu Yan's left arm and immediately stopped. If that flaming beam of light traveled another meter, it would be able to cut Chu Yan's entire body into two. Chapter 302 Ancient Martial Tombs. Chu Yan. Hong Bin was the first to rush onto the arena and carry Chu Yan down. He shouted, "Xiang Nan, come quickly. I beg you, help me save Chu Yen. I can't do it alone." Xiang Nan and the others did not stand idly by because of the previous conflict. Everyone admired Chu Yen very much and rushed forward one after another. Everyone used the Haotian pure essence technique together to at least protect Chu Yan's legs first. "Quick, Mo Hai, go to my master's place and get a bottle of black jade bone reinforcing ointment. Hurry up and go." Mo Hai immediately ran out. "I'm sorry." On the arena, Yi Dong wrapped his right arm with bandages again and said, "Almost." After admitting defeat, the contestant cannot be killed maliciously, otherwise it will be regarded as a violation of the rules of the game. It was precisely Chu Yen who immediately admitted defeat, otherwise the consequences would be unimaginable. But at this moment, the audience was caught in a great sense of crisis. No one understood what Yi Dong had done, and what that unpredictable big eyeball was. Xiang Nan worked with everyone to stabilize Chu Yan's wounds and did his best to protect Chu Yan's legs. At the same time, he looked towards Yi Dong on the arena. Xiang Nan quickly recalled what had happened to the strange tattoo on Yi Dong's arm and the eyeball that could change into a different attribute. However, after thinking for a while, he couldn't find any clues. What kind of martial skill was that? The referee announced the result of the match. In this battle, Yi Dong won. The next two battles were Shen Linhai and Feng Zhaoqi. On the other hand, Xiang Nan and the others smeared black jade bone cream on Chu Yan's broken leg and handed it over to the sect elders, sending it back to the Haran sect to heal her injuries. Has anyone seen Yi Dong's martial skill? Even if it's a similar type, it's fine. Luo Yuan's eyes swept across the crowd. But everyone silently shook their heads. Very strange. Xiang Nan frowned and said, "Xiang Long's transformation in Yi Dong's eyes belong to a type of martial skill that we have never heard of. I may have a simple idea. Wait a moment." After saying that, Xiang Nan immediately went to find his master, Su Kaiyu. "Master, have the Profound Sky sect excavated any ancient tombs in recent years?" Xiang Nan asked. Su Kaiyu pondered for a moment and said, 3 years ago, I heard that the Profound Sky sect found an ancient martial tomb. It is said that the martial tomb is at least 100,000 years old." As expected, Xiang Nan's heart grew heavy. 3 years ago, he hadn't been reborn as Xiang Nan, but at that time, Bai Mukin was already dead. No wonder he didn't know about this. The so-called martial tombs were the tombs left behind by ancient experts. Exactly how many years has the martial arts been passed down? At present, it is impossible to explore it clearly. However, it is clear that throughout the history of martial arts, there are constantly powerful martial skills that are gradually lost in the long river of history because no one is able to cultivate them. For example, if Xiang Nan hadn't found the 9 transformations of thunder created by the Heavenly Thunder Martial King, this heaven-defying cultivation method would have been completely lost, just like the other lost cultivation methods. The more ordinary a martial skill was, the easier it was to pass down. The more fantastic it was, the easier it was to lose a martial skill that was skillful. Actually, it wasn't just the world of martial arts, it was also the world of ordinary people. Didn't many skilled craftsmen lose their skills because their apprenticeships weren't talented enough? Yi Dong's martial skill that could transform into a large eyeball was probably something that the Profound Sky sect had accidentally obtained from the martial tomb. 100,000 years ago, it was an ancient time, and 1,000,000 years ago, it was an ancient time. Therefore, it could be deduced that the martial tomb was an ancient martial tomb. This is a little troublesome. Xiang Nan felt the pressure multiply. The Heavenly Profound sect had suddenly displayed such enormous ambition, wanting to annex the other 7 sections. It seemed that they were well prepared. They had obtained the inheritance of the ancient martial tomb. They must have obtained quite a few ancient martial arts techniques. Perhaps they might not have studied all of those techniques thoroughly, but as long as they learned a few of them, it would be very troublesome. If that was the case, it was very likely that the monster from the Qingshui forest had escaped from the 9 Firmaments continent. To explore a huge martial tomb, one had to have immortal Taoists present. The so-called immortal Taoists were alchemists, artificers, and formation masters. As for that monster, it was an extremely talented alchemist. With Xiang Nan's exploration, one thought gradually became clear. But didn't that mean that it would be even more difficult for him to seek revenge from the Profound Sky sect? Xiang Nan immediately reported his thoughts to Su Kaiyu. Su Kaiyu nodded and said, "We have already guessed that though the Profound Sky sect will definitely obtain some lost martial techniques from the ancient martial tomb. However, we have no way of knowing exactly what type of martial technique it is. These 5 Heavenly Profound sect disciples are definitely 5 people with extraordinary talent. By observing their battles, we can also have a better understanding of the current situation of the Heavenly Profound sect." Yi Dong's big eyeball was not something anyone could practice, otherwise, why didn't Xiang Long and Jiang Qing learn it? "Take care of yourself." Su Kaiyu looked at Xiang Nan seriously and said, "If you die, try not to die too ugly." Xiang Nan was just deep in thought. Now that she heard Su Caiyue's words, she could not help but smile bitterly. "Master, can't you care about your only disciple?" Su Kaiyu replied, "Didn't I already remind you?" "All right." Xiang Nan sighed helplessly and said goodbye to Su Kaiyu before returning to the valley battlefield. The battle that followed Feng Zhaoqi was Su Bufan. The one fighting Su Bufan was a 5th-level origin returning martial cultivator from the Haoran sect. The battle between the two ended as soon as it started. Su Bufan quickly touched the back of the Haoran sect disciple. As expected, the disciple exploded and died. In the following battles, there wasn't much to pay attention to. All the experts had appeared in the previous battles. Very quickly, the 12 battles in 2 days were over, and the top 12 players were decided. Among them, Spread Out drew lots and entered the elimination group together with Xiang Long, who had voluntarily admitted defeat, for the resurrection battle, while the other 3 disciples of the Heavenly Profound sect all won. On Xiang Nan's side, Xiang Nan, Jiang Yu, Moron Wanqing, Shenlin Hai, and Feng Zhaoqi won and entered the top 16. Hong Bin lost to Xiang Nan, Chu Yan lost to Yi Dong, and they entered the elimination group resurrection competition together. On the 3rd day, the elimination group and the resurrection competition officially began. 13 people were competing for 4 resurrection spots. And the gold content of this elimination group was definitely not low. Xiang Long, Spread Out, Hong Bin, and Chu Yan were all inside. These 4 people became the only spectators in the resurrection competition. "I hope they don't draw together." Luo Yuan closed his eyes and prayed silently. The road ahead is dangerous. Xiang Nan's heart was heavy. Chapter 303 Monster to Monster. As for the drawing of lots this time, the contestants were not allowed to touch it with their own hands. 13 number plates were knocked upside down on the ground, marking numbers 1 to 13. All the contestants had to do was pick a random number and the referee would flip the cards. Unfortunately, the result that worried everyone the most was that the person who touched the black card was Xiang Long. The black card was the arena master. Xiang Long walked onto the arena and was eager to try. The other 12 contestants were going to flip their cards again. 11 of them were white cards and 1 was black cards. Those who flipped their cards would fight Xianglong on the arena. The winner stayed on the arena to defend the battles. If he lost, he would go down and wait for orders. Apart from a few contestants, the other contestants were all terrified and praying that they would never face Xianglong again. The result of this first round of fighting was a disciple of the Blazing Fire sect at the 5th level of the Origin realm. This person was named Xiao Dehai. Whoosh! The others heaved a sigh of relief, but Xiao Dehai's face was incomparably pale. He trembled as he walked onto the arena and said to Xianglong, "Senior brother Xianglong, we are both disciples of the Blazing Fire sect, can you read this affection?" "Shut up." Xianglong waved his arm. "Who is he? Is he a disciple of the Blazing Fire sect?" "I am from the Profound Sky sect." "You coward, are you going to cry from fear?" Ha 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 ha. Even if Xiao Dehai was humiliated by Xianglong in public, no matter how thick his skin was, he couldn't help but burst into rage and roar, "You actually dare to insult me? The competition officially begins." The referee signaled the match. Xiao Dehai jumped into the air and raised his sword high, Earth Fiend, Snake King sword. Behind him, a huge viper's face appeared. That viper was extremely ferocious. As for Xiao Dehai's sword light, it was like an adder's messenger as it spat towards Xianglong. This kind of shabby martial skill, it's embarrassing to take out. Xianglong stepped forward and took a bite. He actually used his teeth to break Xiao Dehai's sword light from the middle. "Ah, you!" Xiao Dehai was shocked, and Xianglong had already pounced over. "I admit. Too late." Xianglong whistled up, his left hand covering Xiao Dehai's mouth, his right hand digging into Xiao Dehai's back, pulling out a sparkling blood spine. The blood-sparkling spine was connected to Xiao Dehai's skull. This scene was incomparably cruel, causing the audience to feel nauseous, and at the same time, they were extremely scared in their hearts. Next, Xianglong swayed his muscular body as he walked around the arena. "I admit defeat on my own initiative. I'm here to fight a few more battles. Someone with some ability. You! Get up here." As he spoke, Xianglong pointed at Hongbin. "Bastard, clean your mouth." Hongbin's chest rose and fell in anger. However, it was a pity that the arena master could not designate an opponent. The next card flip would begin. The one who turned the black card was a Quicksand sect disciple named Pang Wang, who was at the 5th level of Origin return. From the beginning, Pang Wang had tried his best to condense the Quicksand world, while Xianglong held on to his shoulders and waited unconcernedly. After the Quicksand world was completed, the overwhelming Yuan Qi stuck Xianglong onto the arena. "This kind of thing." Xianglong raised his right leg. The astonishingly sticky Yuan Qi didn't slow down Xianglong's movements much. Instead, he raised his leg too high and Peng's voice was broken. "TSK, flirtatious." Xianglong took large steps and walked towards Pang Wang. Every time he took a step, he would tear off the extremely sticky Yuan Qi, causing the arena to tremble. Who? Pang Wang was so frightened that his breathing became rapid that he continuously threw out strands of sticky Yuan Qi to cover Xianglong. "Qi, please." Xianglong curled his lips, raised his right foot, and stomped down. Boom! The heavy foot landed on the arena, producing an unimaginable explosive force, instantly sending all the viscous Yuan Qi that covered the entire arena flying away. Xianglong's bow shot out with a whoosh, smashing down with a heavy punch, causing Pang Wang's head to explode with a punch. Next, Xiang Long patted his body and laughed wildly. Don't draw Chu Yen. Li Qingchuan and the others muttered silently. Chu Yan's legs had just been connected, and now she could only barely walk, unable to withstand any intense battles. If she was only dealing with an ordinary 5th level origin returning martial artist, it would be fine. Once she met someone at the same level as Xiang Long, her legs would probably break apart in one move. Looking at Xiang Long, everyone was relieved from their fear. Xiang Long only needed to win another battle to be able to successfully revive. However, the more they reached the last person, the more terrified the contestants became. Finally, the person who flipped through the black card appeared. This person was actually... Oh. Lao Zhan, is you? Xiang Long hugged his shoulders and laughed loudly. The last person to fight Xiang Long was actually a disciple of the Profound Sky sect, Spread Out. At that moment, the audience cheered. Ha! They've drawn people from their own sect. You deserve it. You deserve it. At the same time, the Resurrection Group's contestants let out a long sigh of relief. In fact, at this time, they were already drenched in cold sweat, soaking their robes. No matter what, he could survive and not fight that monster anymore. Spread Out leaned over and jumped onto the arena, saying, Xiang Long, go all out. Xiang Long crossed his arms and nodded, of course. I will not show mercy. What? They're going all out. The audience was cheering, but they were stunned by the conversation between the two of them. What's going on? Aren't these two people from the Profound Sky sect? Could it be that the two of them were going all out against each other? In any case, one of the two of them would definitely lose in battle. It was better to discuss it in advance and directly find someone to admit defeat. Isn't this the way to preserve their strength? However, after a brief pause, the audience shouted even louder. Fight, fight desperately. Killing one was the best. I declare that the competition will begin. The referee dropped his right hand. Xiang Long shook Wei En's body and ran towards Spread Out with a rumble. Spread Out took a step forward, his left hand enveloped the sword with Yuan Qi, his right hand tightly gripped the hilt of the sword, and he made a move to pull out the sword, while his eyes were as sharp as an eagle's. Come on! Xiang Long jumped up and smashed his huge fist towards Spread Out. At this moment, a wisp of light flashed across Spread Out's eyes. He said in a hoarse voice, shadow style, wind attack. As soon as he finished speaking, Spread Out disappeared from the spot. When he reappeared, he was already in front of Xiang Long. The sharp sword in his hand aimed at Xiang Long's chest and slashed over 100 times. At this moment, another Spread Out appeared behind Xiang Long. The Spread Out behind him was also swiftly hacking at the sword, and hundreds of swords were instantly finished. Almost at the same time, a spreading out appeared on Xiang Long's left and right. The sound of the sharp sword hacking at Xiang Long was too intense, too fast. The hundreds of swords were completed almost at the same time, and the sound of several hundred slashes was unexpectedly converged into a crisp, clanging sound because the time was too short. So fast. Xiang Nan's eyes moved. Spread Out did not have an avatar. It was only because his speed was too fast that 4 afterimages appeared on his body. With a clang sound, Xiang Long's enormous body suddenly flew backwards. Countless small wounds appeared on his body, spraying a mist of blood in the air. I'm injured and bleeding. The audience stood up with their hair in their hands and shouted loudly. Xiang Long was injured for the first time. Chapter 304 Meteorite. After Xiang Long landed on the ground, his entire body became excited when he saw the injuries on his body. His body began to rapidly grow bigger. Ha 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 ha. Old John, you're strong enough. Xiang Long's body swelled to 5 meters, and a pair of horns appeared on his head. As he spoke, Xiang Long quickly ran towards Spread Out. His 5-meter-tall body and legs were incredibly long. He took several steps forward to stand up to an ordinary person. His thick arms like tree trunks and fists the size of 1,000 kilograms of stones drove the whistling wind toward Spread Out. Spread Out bowed and drew his sword, and his body disappeared. At the same time, hundreds of swords were instantly cut across Xiang Long's body. The sharp blade of the sword collided with his body, producing large sparks, as if it were cutting through steel. Xiang Long seemed to have predicted where Spread Out was. He turned around and smashed his huge fist towards his back. At the point where Xiang Long's fist landed, a sword first appeared. The fist smashed into the blade of the sword and continuously retreated against the sword. Then, the true body appeared after holding onto the sword. As Spread Out's feet slid backwards on the ground, his body disappeared again. At the same time, Xiang Long's body instantly endured hundreds of swords. Xiang Long turned around and punched again. He still couldn't hit Spread Out, or was cut by the Chaos Sword. The speed at which he spread out was so fast that Xiang Long Kong had a body full of power, but there was nowhere to use it. However, Spread Out was still unable to do anything to Xiang Long. Xiang Long laughed loudly, "Old John, your fast sword can't even break through my skin. I advise you to fight me honestly." Hearing this, the nearby contestants hurriedly looked at Xiang Long. Sure enough, he had been beheaded thousands of times by Spread Out, and there wasn't even a single sword mark on his body, let alone a sword injury. Whoosh! Spread Out let out a long breath and appeared in midair. His body slowly drifted down. With a shake of his right hand, Yuan Qi poured into the sword, forming a flame. The Yuan Qi flames wrapped around the sword, creating a frightening temperature. Even the air around the sword distorted, giving people a sense of visual deviation. "Ha, this is decent." Xiang Long rushed over with a thunderous rush, but he still punched down with a simple punch. Straight fists depended on who was attacking, just like Xiang Long. When a person's strength reached a certain level, even an extremely ordinary kung fu would become extremely powerful. Shadow stance, wind roar. Spread Out's sword slanted towards the ground, and an explosive Yuan Qi sprayed out from the soles of his feet. The Yuan Qi sprayed upwards vertically, causing his clothes and long hair to violently shake in the sky. When Xiang's grand punch came, Spread Out suddenly raised his sword, which was pointing at the ground. With a loud boom, a tornado-like storm of sword blades rose from the ground. The middle of the tornado protruded forward and crashed into Xiang Long's embrace. The whistling wind was a sword blade tornado formed by the rapid twisting of pure sword blade Yuan Qi. The power of this thing was astonishing. Xiang Long's big arm was sucked in by the storm of sword blades. No matter what, he couldn't pull it out. He took a step back and tried to pull out his arm. However, he dragged the storm of sword blades along with him and pulled it out again. The storm of sword blades continued to follow. On the other hand, Xiang Long's arm had been cut thousands of times in a second, and his defense had been broken. A large number of small and dense cuts had appeared on the skin of his arm. A small amount of blood droplets had been spilled from the wound, and even the blood droplets had been instantly cut into a blood mist. Not only was Xiang Long not in a hurry, he was even more excited. Then, he made a move that surprised everyone. Xiang Long no longer tried to dodge the storm of sword blades. Instead, he stretched out his left hand and used his two thick arms to embrace the storm of sword blades. Following that, his arms suddenly contracted. He used his powerful arms to squeeze the storm of sword blades. It was as if he had hugged the enemy's waist and wanted to use great strength to snap the enemy's waist. Seeing that the storm of sword blades had actually started to shrink due to his choke, and the upper and lower ends of the sword blades had correspondingly thickened, the sound of a sword blade breaking could be heard. Countless Yuan Qi sword blades were crushed by Xiang Long's power and shattered into pieces. The storm of sword blades was finally unbearable, and it broke apart. Peng's voice exploded into bright spots all over the sky. Looking at Xiang Long, the wounds on the inner side of his arms and chest were the most numerous. The density of the wounds looked like a mess of flesh and blood. However, Xiang Nan and the others knew that Xiang Long's injuries seemed to be shocking, but in reality, it was only a real skin injury. He only injured his skin, not even his muscles. It's my turn to retaliate. Xiang Long stepped forward and punched down, but spread out's body disappeared again with a whoosh. Hey, let's see where you run to this time. Xiang Long jumped up from the ground, his huge body leaping into the sky 50 meters away. A meteorite descended from the sky. Xiang Long roared. His enormous body rapidly rotated in the sky. He stretched out his right arm and made a hook fist gesture. The big fist hugged the strong wind, causing his Yuan Qi to surge and ignite a ball of fire. When his body rotated at its highest speed, a fist suddenly descended from the sky. His enormous body was engulfed in raging flames, as if a meteorite had descended from the sky. Spread Out quickly dodged Xiang Long's core attack range. At almost the same time, Xiang Long's attack also landed. His goal is not to depart. Xiang Nan frowned and said, "It's the arena." As if to verify Xiang Nan's claim, Xiang Long was engulfed in a ball of flames and his heavy punch landed at the center of the arena. A heaven-shaking explosion was heard in the valley. A tyrannical gale engulfed the fire wave and was squeezed out of the gap between Xiang Long's punch. The referees could only condense their Yuan Qi walls once more to block the shockwaves that spread out from the arena. Under the terrifying impact of the fist wind, Spread Out's body was blown backwards rapidly. He stepped on the ground with one foot, and at the same time, Yuan Qi burst out from his feet in an attempt to stabilize the speed of his retreat. In the end, doing so did not have much effect. It only slowed down his retreat slightly. Spread Out had no choice but to stab the sword on the ground and use his strength to drag his body. "I can't escape." A greedy light flashed in Xiang Long's eyes. He ran through the flames with a rumble. He jumped up halfway and punched down. Spread Out was wreaked havoc by the fierce winds and waves. It was very difficult for him to maintain his balance, let alone counterattack. He could only raise his sword temporarily. Xiang Long's punch landed firmly on Spread Out's sword. A terrifying penetrating force pierced through the sword and engulfed Spread Out. Spread Out's body was smashed into an illusion and fell out of the arena. Halfway through, he stabbed his sword into the ground again. He stepped on the ground with his feet that were condensed with Yuan Qi and rubbed the ground with the tip of his sword, producing 3 streaks of flames. When his body finally stopped at the edge of the arena, he suddenly knelt on one knee and spat out a mouthful of blood. Injury plus injury. Muron Wanqing said, "The punch that Xiang Long struck on the arena injured Spread Out with just the impact, and the punch that hit the sword body caused Spread Out's defensive power to completely collapse. This Xiang Long is incredibly strong." Chapter 305 Peak to Peak. The brutal impact of Xiang Long's bombardment of the arena disappeared in a flash. Spread Out was heavily injured, and his movements were greatly restricted. He was no longer able to dodge sensitively. In fact, it was hard for everyone to imagine why Spread Out was still alive at this moment. According to everyone's speculation, Xiang Long's punch landed on Spread Out's sword, and the penetration of his power was enough to destroy Spread Out's entire body. However, Spread Out was only seriously injured. It seemed that this person was not only fast, but also had a strong defense. "I said you can't escape, right?" Xiang Long took 2 steps back and slightly bent his body, followed by a fierce charge. This time, Xiang Long's charge was extremely fast. The injured Spread Out dodged quickly and had already dodged Xiang Long's attack. However, Xiang Long's large hand suddenly grabbed his wrist. Xiang Long grabbed Spread Out's wrist and jumped up high, smashing him onto the arena. Pooh! Spread Out spat out blood and his body rebounded from the impact. He was pushed down again by Spread Out's powerful knee strike. When Spread Out rebounded from the arena for the second time, he waved his sword with his right hand and sliced into Xiang Long's arm with a clang. He used the rebound force to eject his body and temporarily dodge the calamity. He can still retaliate under such circumstances. Even Xiang Nan couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. When a person was struck by such a terrifying knee and landed on the ground, and even rebounded, not to mention retaliating, even if he was still alive, it would be considered amazing. "Spread Out, you won't be able to break through my defense." Xiang Long rubbed his arm, where Spread Out had slashed him to death just now, leaving behind only a shallow white mark that did not even hurt his skin. Jiang Qing, Su Bufan, and the others stood under the arena. Jiang Qing nodded. This Spread Out is really forced into a desperate situation. Let's see how he handles it. If you don't risk your life, you won't have a chance. Xiang Long rubbed his huge fist and strode toward Spread Out. At this time, Spread Out had already become a bloody man. He let out a long breath and held the hilt of the sword with both of his hands. Suddenly, his hands split into 2, and the sword split into 2. However, the fierce yuan qi on his body suddenly fell silent. The yuan qi fluctuations became weaker and weaker, making it difficult for people to sense it in the end. What is he doing? Have you given up? Muron Wanqing frowned, unable to guess Spread Out's thoughts. Spread Out held the 2 swords in both hands. After taking a deep breath, the fluctuations in his chest disappeared. It was as if at this moment, his yuan qi, heartbeat, and blood flow had all stopped. "It's coming." Su Bufan licked his lips, his eyes shining with excitement. The audience was completely silent, and no one could guess what would happen next. On the other hand, Feng Zhaoqi's gaze suddenly became fierce, his expression extremely solemn. Spread Out took a 3rd deep breath and silently said, "Heart like steel." Xiang Long jumped up and punched down. There was an explosive force on his fist. As for Spread Out, he took a step forward, his 2 swords overlapping, blocking the sky. Boom! The heavy punch fiercely smashed into the 2 crossed swords, and a shockwave quickly spread out. Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air. Spread Out actually used his weak body to block Xiang Long's infinite punch. Kiki, kiki. The huge fist pressed down on the 2 swords, making the sound of the swords rubbing against each other. "What is heart like steel?" Luo Yuan cried out in surprise. Why is it that the fist that was previously unable to block is now blocked instead? It's sword intent. Feng Zhaoqi held the sword and said indifferently. Spread Out pulled his left hand away and continued to resist Xiang Long's fist with a single sword in his hand. Then, he pulled out the other sword with his left hand. Then, his entire body abruptly shortened and he turned around from under Xiang Long. Chi-chi. Two cutting sounds appeared, and Spread Out had already bent over and appeared behind Xiang Long. Xiang Long's chest suddenly burst into blood. An X-shaped cross-sword wound appeared. The sword wound was so deep that it could already be seen to be bone. The entire audience was filled with cold breaths. "It's cut." Xiang Nan clenched his fist and said, he broke Xiang Long's defense. These two swords not only cut through Xiang Long's incomparably hard skin, but also cut through his muscles, exposing the ribs inside. Xiang Long suddenly turned around and punched down. Spread Out held the sword in his hand, and when the sword collided with a heavy punch, the fist smashed into the edge of the sword, producing a deafening crisp sound. However, Spread Out did not retreat from the impact. His body bent slightly, and then his body suddenly sank, spinning around Xiang Long. Chi! With a slash, Xiang Long's right leg was cut into a deep bone wound, and blood flowed down his long leg. This Luo Yuan swallowed a mouthful of saliva, not knowing how to describe what he was seeing. Ahahaha, how satisfying! Xiang Long became excited and punched down one punch after another. That Spread Out continuously used a single sword lattice to block it. Every time his fist struck the edge of the sword, a shockwave would explode. However, no matter what, such a huge fist could no longer smash down the thin and narrow sword. "Think like lightning," Spread Out said silently, and his body suddenly disappeared. In the next instant, Spread Out appeared in front of Xiang Long. In another instant, Spread Out appeared behind Xiang Long. In another instant, Spread Out appeared above Xiang Long's head. Within a few flashes, the afterimage of the unfolding flashed rapidly around Xiang Long, as if the sky and earth were unfolding. Collect. Suddenly, Spread Out's body stopped and appeared at the edge of the arena. As for Xiang Long, he maintained his previous punch. Then, he knelt down with a loud boom and lowered his head. Chi! Chi 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 chi! A cutting sound rang out, followed by dozens of cutting sounds. Xiang Long, who was kneeling on the ground with his head lowered, suddenly had 30 ferocious sword wounds visible from head to toe. Blood surged everywhere, shooting into the sky like a fountain. "Are you dead?" Xiang Nan took a deep breath. 30 consecutive slashes, the sword to the bone. Logically speaking, Xiang Long should have already been sliced into meat sauce. Murong Wanqing's heartbeat also accelerated. On the one hand, he was shocked by Spread Out's strength. On the other hand, he felt that he couldn't understand the incredible defensive power of his physical body. The audience looked at each other. Then, Xiang Long, who is as strong as a monster, lost. Heavens, can such a terrifying monster be killed? The scene was extremely quiet, but the referee did not announce the winner's name. Right at this moment, Xiang Long, who was lowering his head, suddenly spoke. "You are the only person other than Lao Yi who has forced me to such an extent. He he. Ha 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 ha. Not dead yet? This guy is laughing." The audience was stunned as if they had seen a ghost. Ha 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 ha. Xiang Long raised his head and laughed wildly at the sky. The shocking sword wounds on his body actually began to heal. Chapter 306 Top 16. Xiang Long's ferocious wounds quickly healed at a speed visible to the naked eye. The wounds closed together and slowly wriggled like insects. Xiang Long stood up again. "Ha! Monster. He's not a human. The audience clutched their hair and cried out in despair. Why could a person be so strong? Can't even kill Spread Out. Then who else could defeat Xianglong? Who? At this moment, Xianglong's massive body suddenly spat out a thin mist of blood. The blood mist enveloped his entire body. Then, with another puff, a thin mist of blood sprayed out. Didn't his injuries heal? Shen Linhai cried out in shock. Xiang Nan said in a low voice, "See clearly, the blood mist is not sprayed from the wound, but from every pore on his body. Feel it carefully. Xianglong's aura is surging crazily." Ha! Jiang Qing smiled playfully. This big barbaric bull has finally fallen into a berserk state. Spread Out. Xianglong took a deep breath, as if he was enjoying the smell of blood in the air. You did a good job. I am very satisfied. Xianglong, who was shrouded in a bloody mist, suddenly exploded. His body transformed into a wisp of light, bringing along a faint blood energy that instantly arrived in front of Spread Out. That Spread Out immediately raised his two swords, and then was smashed by Xianglong's fist on the intersecting sword blades. Pooh! Spread Out, who had been able to perfectly block Xianglong's attack earlier, vomited a large mouthful of blood after being smashed. So fast! Xiang Nan's heart skipped a beat. This Xianglong had previously been very powerful, but his speed was definitely not that fast. Spread Out was not a vegetarian either. After receiving the penetrating force of a punch, his body swiftly flashed past Xianglong, and he cut a sword wound on Xianglong's waist. However, although the sword wound this time was also very deep, it was far from being as deep as the bone that could be seen just now. At most, it was only 3 inches deep. A 3-inch deep wound was very dangerous for ordinary people, but it wasn't that terrifying for Xianglong, who was 5 meters tall, especially since the wound had just been cut open. It began to heal quickly. Xianglong's body retreated once. His right hand had already grabbed Spread Out's wrist as he retreated. As he was pulling Spread Out back, his left fist fiercely landed on Spread Out's stomach. Spread Out's eyeballs protruded from the corner of his eyes, and 2 streams of blood sprayed out from the corner of his eyes. Chi. When Spread Out was able to withstand such a terrifying punch at close range, he was able to counterattack, slicing a sword into Xianglong's arm, and seizing the opportunity to escape from Xianglong's control. Following that, his body began to move at a high speed, transforming into a phantom image. Xianglong jumped 100 meters into the air. He clasped his fists and shrunk his body into a ball. He shouted, "Meteorite calamity!" At that moment, Xianglong's body split into nearly 100 yuan chi light balls. Each ball of light was the same size as Xianglong. In an instant, Xianglong was the first to bombard the arena. His clasped body tumbled violently in the air, rubbing against the sea of fire. Almost 100 balls of light also smashed down together, similarly withstanding the surging flames. A meteor shower has appeared. Boom! Xianglong was the first to hit the arena, followed by deafening explosions. The huge and sturdy arena was actually smashed to the point that numerous cracks appeared. The entire arena was enveloped by the meteor shower, and not a single one of them was spared. The sea of flames spread out, and the judges condensed their yuan chi walls to block the surging flames. After the flames touched the yuan chi walls, there was no place for them to vent their flames, so all of them shot into the air. In the entire valley, apart from the addiction of the meteor shower bombarding the arena, no one could hear the sound of breathing or talking. Such a spectacular scene, such a shocking attack, it was like a meteor shower continuously assaulting the continent, assaulting the entire world. Very quickly, such an astonishing martial skill had a swift and decisive momentum. There was only Xiang Long standing on the arena, and the surface of the arena was filled with cracks. Outside the arena, Spread Out was lying on the ground, his eyes staring straight at the sky, his entire body lying in a pool of blood, unable to move anymore. Everyone was shocked by this scene. The winner of this match, Xiang Long. The referee finally announced the final result. At that moment, Xiang Long raised his arms high up and let out a wild beast-like roar of victory towards the sky. Roar! Amidst that roar, the entire entrance exam scene was cloudy. Who else can handle this monster? He was simply an undefeatable war god. The spectators didn't have to fight, so they were more concerned about the champion of the joint exam. Therefore, everyone's mood was extremely depressed. Some people even felt despair like an abyss. As for the eliminated contestants, they were more concerned about their own life and death when facing Xiang Long, so they all heaved a sigh of relief in their hearts. At least Xiang Long had successfully revived, so they didn't have to fight Xiang Long anymore. Spread Out failed and entered the seats to be decided. Next, he needed to wait for the results of the others. If 3 more people emerged victorious in 3 battles, Spread Out would be eliminated and would not be fated to be in the top 16. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Yi Dong and the others quickly healed Spread Out's injuries. Xiang Long's advancement was successful, and the defenders left. The remaining people continued to draw lots to determine the black card arena master. The one who drew lots this time was Hong Bin. The person who drew the black card was Chu Yen. At the beginning of the battle, Hong Bin directly admitted defeat. Hong Bin. Chu Yen frowned and said, "Why?" Hong Bin smiled, "Your leg injury hasn't completely healed yet. It's not suitable for intense combat, but you can rest assured. Xiang Long has successfully resurrected. Spread Out is still waiting to be seated. In the next 2 battles, you will not encounter any experts. You will advance successfully." Sure enough, apart from Xiang Long and Spread Out, there were no other threats. Chu Yen had won 3 consecutive victories, and she had risen to the top 16 with 3 victories. After that, he continued to draw out the black card arena master. Hong Bin was more dangerous. He thought that he had already lost. Like the other contestants who had also lost, all of them entered the waiting seats. The reason why he said it was dangerous was because he and Spread Out had both lost, and it was very likely that the 2 of them would encounter each other. After witnessing Spread Out's true strength, everyone started to sweat for Hong Bin. However, luckily, Hong Bin and Spread Out did not meet until the end. The 2 of them entered the top 16 successively with 2 victories and 1 defeat. At this point, the resurrection contest was completely over. The resurrection list was Xiang Long, Chu Yen, Hong Bin, and Spread Out. The rest of them stopped outside the top 16 collectively. Following that, the list of the top 16 of the 12 joint examinations was also released. They were Haran Sect, Xiang Nan, Jiang Yu, Feng Zhaoqi, Moron Wanqing, Shen Linhai, Hong Bin, Chu Yen. The Profound Sky Sect, Yi Dong, Xiang Long, Spread Out, Su Bufan, Jiang Qing. White Clothed Sect, Chen Hao. Blazing Fire Sect, Zhang Zhongwei. Azure Cloud Sect, Qian Jun Jingmen Sect, Gu Mulan. Chapter 307 Double Swords Struggling for Supremacy, 1. The contest for the top 8 will be held in 3 days. The goal is to give all participants a buffer period so that everyone can adjust to their best condition. In these 3 days, everyone seized the time to recover. No one ran out to drink anymore. The entire Hautian city was bustling with activity. The final result of the 12 joint examinations affected everyone's hearts. The liveliest place was the tea house. Some of the qualified storytellers were vividly describing the fierce battles of the 12-sect joint examination in the tea house. Some of the storytellers had some martial arts strength and had personally gone to see it. The truth of what they said was closer to reality. There were also some storytellers who hadn't been to the Hauran mountain range, but based on some rumors, they added water and ingredients to themselves, causing their saliva to fly everywhere, causing the audience to be intoxicated. The merchants of Hautian City saw great business opportunities and immediately suspended all the businesses. They also hired a talkative gentleman to read books. Weapons stores, spirit herb stores, and even auction houses had all been temporarily converted into storytelling libraries. However, this was still unable to satisfy the large number of residents of Hautian City. If they wanted to listen to a book from the joint entrance exam, the ticket prices would soar all the way, making the merchants earn a lot of money. Although the trump card army of Haujing had left, they had also sent a few envoys. They had witnessed the process of half a dozen consecutive examinations. So far, the Haujing side was quite satisfied with the current situation. At least 7 disciples of the Hauran sect had entered the top 16. Although the final result had not yet been announced, the current situation was still within acceptable limits. The Murong clan found Xiang Nan and gave him a high evaluation of his performance. Murong Zheng personally brought Murong Chongshan's instructions to Xiang Nan and said that no matter what Xiang Nan wanted during the joint examination, the Murong clan would do their utmost to help him. However, Xiang Nan did not ask for anything. Firstly, what he needed was a formula to enhance his resistance to electricity. The Murong clan did not have such a thing. Secondly, Xiang Nan only played a part with Murong Wanqing, so he really didn't have the face to ask for things from the Murong clan, so as not to get involved too deeply. The person in charge of the Whampoa aristocrat clan in Hautian City retrieved the arena that had been injured by Xiang Long and went back to work overtime to repair it. At the same time, he used 6 artifacts to work together. The Nature Sect's Zhaohua Peak provided the top 16 disciples of the Nature Sect with an unlimited amount of intermediate-grade spirit stones, rejuvenation pills, and so on. The other 4 outer sect disciples who were lucky enough to enter the top 16 were receiving secret training from the elders. It was impossible for them to increase their strength within 3 days, but the elders carefully observed the battle patterns of the Hauran sect and the Heavenly Profound sect disciples. He analyzed the situation and passed on the experience to the 4 outer sect disciples to prepare them for battle. The next battle for the top 8 was about to begin. Regardless of whether it was the commoners, the commercial clans, or the various sects, they were all busy preparing. Soon, 3 days had passed, and the battle for the top 8 was about to begin. The top 16 disciples appeared in the midst of the anticipation of the crowd, and they were greeted with enthusiastic applause and shouts. When Xiang Nan arrived at the valley, he discovered that the number of spectators had almost doubled. Because of the appearance of Tianxian sect disciples in the 12-sect joint examination, this matter could be said to be unstoppable. The rumors quickly leaked out, and this increased the drama and enjoyment of the 12-sect joint examination. A large number of 2nd and 3rd grade sects in the Hautian Empire, as well as many martial arts clans that did not belong to the sect, also rushed over when they heard the news. Originally, the mountain peaks on both sides of the valley were filled with nearly 100,000 spectators. Now, even the cliffs of the valley were filled with people, and nearly 160,000 people were watching. Fortunately, the battle zone in the final 16 had shrunk, and the nature sect had closed the barrier to 1/5 of its original size, allowing more people to watch the match at close range. According to Haojing's thoughts, it was not allowed to let more spectators in. It was best to let as few spectators as possible. However, the Haoren sect had burned the boat this time, so they decided to let go. This time, the competition. I.Tian list mechanism of the top 16 had changed. After the 16 contestants drew lots, the competition. I.Tian groups were directly displayed in the form of a list. The top 16 were divided into 2 groups of 8, and the 8 winners entered the final 4 battles. The first match, Feng Zhaoqi vs Zhanli, Game 2, Xiang Nan vs Chen Hao. The third match, Chu Yan vs Gu Mulan. The fourth match was between Hong Bin and Xiang Long. The list of the 2 groups was as follows. The first match, Shen Linhai vs Su Bufan. Second match, Murong Wanqing vs Zhang Zhongwei. The third match, Jiang Qing vs Qian Jun. Game 4, Jiang Yu vs Yi Dong. The top 16 matches were divided into 2 days. On the first day, a group of contestants fought. On the second day, 2 groups of contestants appeared on the stage. They were all finished in 2 days. And the audience gave the highest enthusiasm to the first group. The reason for that was because the 2 people in the first match of the first group were 2 heavyweight sword Dao experts, Feng Zhaoqi and Spread Out. A clear list of battles allowed everyone to have a more intuitive understanding of the battle process. In particular, this battle would become crucial, because this battle would determine the top 8 contestants. The top 10 disciples of the 12 sects joint examination will receive an Earth Grade Intermediate Grade martial skill, an Earth Grade High Grade weapon, and a Grade 5 medicinal pill. With a mysterious reward. As long as he could win 1 match in the final 16, he would be able to obtain those rewards steadily. Very quickly, Elder Shi Beihong announced that the final 16 tournament would officially begin amidst the cries of the audience. In the first battle, Feng Zhaoqi fought against Spread Out. The 2 of them had already stepped onto the newly repaired arena, and a great battle was about to break out. Feng Zhaoqi held the long sword in his arms, while Spread Out, who was standing opposite him, held the long sword in his hand. The sharp gazes of the 2 of them collided with intense sparks in midair. "We've finally met." Spread Out raised his sword and pointed at Feng Zhaoqi. "If I remember correctly, that was the last time you saved Li Qingchuan." Feng Zhaoqi held the long sword in his arms and said, "This sword was once defeated by you, but there will never be a second time. Alright, now I declare that the first match of the first group of the final 16 will officially begin." The referee raised his right hand high and swiftly slashed down. Just as the signal for the match sounded, Feng Zhaoqi and Spread Out opened fire. At the same time, sword intent erupted from the 2 of them, causing everyone's hearts to tremble. "I've seen some this time." Xiang Nan took a deep breath and looked forward to the next battle. Murong Wanqing and the others nodded in succession, but they were no longer in the mood to chat. Everyone's eyes were nervously staring at the arena. On the arena, Feng Zhaoqi and Spread Out were already walking towards each other. When the 2 of them reached a distance of 10 meters, Feng Zhaoqi took a step forward. He held the scabbard in his left hand and grabbed the hilt in his right. The sword in Spread Out's hand quietly disappeared. Ding 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 ding. A series of intense and crisp collisions resounded in the air. However, in the eyes of the spectators and most of the contestants, they were unable to see the movements of those 2 people drawing their swords. Feng Zhaoqi still maintained the posture of drawing his sword. Only an inch of his sword was exposed, while the sword in Spread Out's hand was still missing. However, the dense sound of metal colliding in the air meant that not only did they attack, they also attacked at an extremely fast speed. Chapter 308 Double Sword Struggling for Heroism, 2. It was as if there were two sword chi barriers that couldn't be seen by the naked eye enveloping the two of them. Right now, the two sword chi barriers were fiercely resisting each other. Just as the battle between the two of them was at its most intense, Feng Xiaoqi's body suddenly flashed and disappeared. Shortly after, Spread Out also slightly flashed and disappeared from the arena. As a result, the collision of the sword blades in the air became more and more intense. In an invisible battle, apart from the sound of weapons colliding, there would occasionally be a stream of blood that would suddenly shoot out from the air. The audience suddenly boiled over as they shouted in dissatisfaction. "No way! We can't even see their movements. How are you going to watch this match? The two of them are gone. Haran sect, think of a way. We want to watch the match." There was nothing he could do. Feng Xiaoqi and Spread Out were too fast. Apart from Xiang Nan and the other outer sect elders in the spectator stands, there was no one else who could see a match at Mu Sueki's level. Feng Xiaoqi's speed had already exceeded the speed limit that ordinary spectators could recognize with the naked eye. Right at this moment, Elder Shi Beihong descended from the sky. He stood directly at the top of the battlefield barrier in the valley and revealed a strange power from his feet. Afterwards, the barrier suddenly became incomparably clear. This clarity greatly enhanced the audience's ability to recognize with the naked eye, allowing them to clearly see the movements of the two speed-type martial artists on the arena. Feng Xiaoqi and Spread Out were swiftly moving around in the air. At first, the two of them circled around the edge of the arena at high speed, and their swords frantically clashed. Immediately after, the two of them quickly dispersed and charged forward. Feng Xiaoqi and Spread Out shot at each other and brushed past each other. Chi! The sleeve of Feng Xiaoqi's right arm was broken, and a sword wound appeared on his arm. Everyone looked carefully. This was already Feng Xiaoqi's seventh sword wound, although the wound was not too deep. However, Spread Out's body was completely unharmed. Clearly, the fresh blood that shot out from the air just now came from Feng Xiaoqi alone. It's a pity that I was able to avoid getting hurt. Xiang Nan's eyes flickered with lightning as he shook his head. Your realm is too bad. Spread Out moved and pointed the tip of his sword at Feng Xiaoqi. In the battle between the two, Feng Xiaoqi perfectly blocked all of Spread Out's attacks. However, Feng Xiaoqi was only at the 3rd level of origin return, while Spread Out was at the 5th level of origin return. Feng Xiaoqi was blocked by the 7 strikes, but because of the difference in cultivation realm, he was pushed away and was still hit in the end. This difference in strength came from the difference in cultivation realm and the small suppression effect of cultivation realm. Whoosh! Feng Xiaoqi took a deep breath and took out a pale yellow pill from his storage ring. He said to Spread Out, "Do you mind? It's a tier 4 sword pill." Xiang Nan frowned. Zhao Qi is ready to fight. The sword pill was a very special medicinal pill. After consuming it, it could greatly strengthen the sword heart of a sword Dao expert within an hour. The growth of the sword heart could make up for the disadvantage caused by the difference in cultivation realms, but not everyone could consume this kind of pill. However, there was a clear rule in the competition that no restorative pills or strength-enhancing pills could be taken before the end of the competition. However, it was debatable whether strengthening the sword core was within this range. This is the best. The corners of Spread Out's mouth slightly rose as he said, "If you don't eat this thing, I'm also prepared to suppress myself to fight you." The referees discussed it for a while. Since Spread Out didn't mind, they naturally didn't have any objections. Feng Zhaoqi tossed the sword pill into his mouth and swallowed it. Very quickly, his realm, physical strength, and Yuan Qi didn't get any substantial improvement, but his aura instantly became more than a little stronger. Almost. Feng Zhaoqi nodded at spread out. The sword pill could only make up for the gap in cultivation realm. Instead of catching up, that was to say, the gap between Feng Zhaoqi and spread out still existed, only narrowing slightly. Come on. With a flash of his sword, spread out's body turned into an afterimage and rushed forward. Feng Zhaoqi grabbed the hilt of the sword with his right hand and took a step forward. Suddenly, an enormous arc of sword light appeared in front of him. Qi! With a tearing sound, spread out quickly cut open the sword light and broke through. Shadow stance, wind attack. Spread out's body flickered again, appearing directly in front of Feng Zhaoqi. Then, he dodged again, and left and right in front of him were the phantom images of spread out. The gale-like sword blade slashed towards Feng Zhaoqi at top speed. Night-ripping slash. Feng Zhaoqi drew out his sword with a clanging sound, and the sword trembled vertically upwards. At the same time, countless tiny sword arcs suddenly shot out from the two sword blades in all directions. Spread out surrounded Feng Zhaoqi and attacked at full speed, while Feng Zhaoqi did not move and attacked with his sword. The sword qi of both sides surged, and the sword intent soared into the clouds. With a burst of qi sounds, Feng Zhaoqi's body was constantly receiving swords, and streams of blood sprayed out in the shape of a fan. At the same time that spread out attacked Feng Zhaoqi, he was constantly hit. In an instant, there were 7 or 8 wounds on his forechest, and the same blood mist drifted about. Once the two of them exchanged blows, they exchanged hundreds of swords in just 2 seconds. The total number of swords reached more than 1,000. After a short melee attack, the two of them turned into two shadows and quickly separated. The afterimage of spread out landed on the ground and slashed down with a sword, shadow style, wind roar. A huge storm of sword blades soared into the sky and rushed towards Feng Zhaoqi. Dark clouds cover the moon. Feng Zhaoqi raised his sword and blew out a sword blade. The storm of sword blades collided with the wind wall of the sword blades, and the two of them twisted wildly. The collision of the sword blades was so sharp that it seemed as if it was about to tear apart a person's eardrums. The moment the storm of sword blades collided with the wind wall of sword blades, spread out no longer waited for the result and rushed towards Feng Zhaoqi. Feng Zhaoqi and spread out had the same thoughts and rushed forward. The spread out sword slashed down, and an arc-shaped sword light shot out. Feng Zhaoqi used the hilt of his sword to hit the sword light. He turned his body sideways and swung his hand to form 3 arcs of sword light. Spread out drilled through the gap between the 3 sword lights. The sword vibrated and hundreds of sword blades the size of thumbs shot out. Feng Zhaoqi pushed forward with his left hand, blocking the sword blade with his bare hands, while the long sword in his right hand instantly spun wildly, sprinkling out a ring-by-ring sword blade. In this high-density battle, he simply did not have enough time to condense his Yuan Qi. Because of this, Feng Zhaoqi's left arm was instantly crippled. The flesh and blood of the sword blade that had been unfurled was blurry, and the bones of his left arm had been broken inch by inch. However, it was also uncomfortable for him to be able to leave. He was cut into his left leg by Feng Zhaoqi's circular sword blade. He was also cut to pieces, and the tendons of his legs were broken together. The two of them landed on the ground at the same time and simultaneously drew their swords. My heart is like steel. Spread out's entire body suddenly became incomparably calm. He slashed down with his sword, as if his body had already turned into a man of steel. His strength and destructiveness had soared to the extreme. Feng Xiaoqi blocked the sword lattice with his backhand. The two swords collided and were sent flying by Spread Out and the other two swords. Feng Xiaoqi's sword flew out with a whoosh, and with a chi sound, it stabbed into the arena. The hilt of the sword continued to buzz. Feng Xiaoqi was lying on the ground and sliding backwards. His body was under unparalleled pressure. Even though he quickly condensed his yuan qi to protect his back, the yuan qi was also quickly drained away, leaving behind a string of bloody marks on the arena. If you can't break my sword intent, you will have already lost this battle. He stretched his right leg and stood on the ground, pointing his sword at Feng Xiaoqi. Heart-like steel was a kind of sword intent, not any martial skill, sword move. This kind of sword intent could make sword Dao experts reach an unimaginable level of strength. Looking at Feng Xiaoqi again, his left arm was lowered, but he pulled a black cloth off his body with his right hand, blindfolding his eyes. Immediately after, he raised his right hand, and the sword stabbed into the arena shook twice before flying back into his hand with a whoosh. The hearts of the spectators were beating wildly. That was an arena that was comparable to an Earth-grade weapon's hardness. It was actually pierced by a sword. Oh! Seeing that Feng Xiaoqi was blindfolded, Spread Out nodded and said, "It's getting more and more interesting." "Who?" Feng Xiaoqi held the sword in his hand and said, "This is my sword intent." Sea of Bitterness. Chapter 309 Double Sword Struggling for Heroism, 3. This is my sword intent. Feng Xiaoqi covered his eyes with cloth and said, "Sea of Bitterness." As soon as he finished speaking, an invisible wave appeared on the surface of the arena. Feng Xiaoqi floated up, his feet about 3 feet off the ground, his body undulating like a treading wave. "My heart is like steel." Spread Out split the long sword in two and dodged towards Feng Xiaoqi with the two swords in his hands. The two swords chopped out an X shape. Feng Xiaoqi tilted his head slightly and stepped on the waves. He accurately dodged the attack of Spread Out. As he dodged, he raised his sword and a water dragon pounced out from the arena. The water dragon was sliced open halfway by the X sword blade and immediately turned into tens of thousands of water droplets. The water droplets were as smooth as mirrors, as sharp as knives, shooting towards Spread Out's body, producing a dense collision sound of ding 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 ding. Spread Out's body kept retreating from the impact. He waved his hand and grabbed a drop of water. He looked at it before his eyes and said in a deep voice, "The drop of water is like a blade. Unfortunately, you can't break through my defense." His unfolding heart was like steel, allowing his body to become as strong as a weapon. Although it was not comparable to Xiang Long's abnormal defense, it was already an unbreakable defense for ordinary people. Shadow stance, wind roar. As he spoke, Spread Out's two swords slashed together, and two tornado-shaped sword blades stormed out. But when these two sword blade storms came together, they swept through the vast amount of water of the Sea of Bitterness. The water was sucked into the tornado and spun wildly, throwing out tens of thousands of dense droplets of water. What was terrifying was that the water droplets that were thrown out were actually capable of attacking. They were all sharp blades. Ding 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 ding. Another wave of intense collisions rang out, and tens of thousands of water droplets sliced into Spread Out's body. What? Spread Out's eyes twitched. Will my own attacks pose a threat to me after meeting the Sea of Bitterness? He lowered his head and looked at his body. His long shirt had been completely destroyed, and the surface of his exposed skin had many tiny cuts, like silk. Break through the defenses. I understand. Xiang Nan said, the heart that unfolds is like steel. It is the unity of man and sword, making his body as hard as a weapon. Zhao Qi's sea of bitterness transforms Yuan Qi into a tidal wave. Every drop of water is a sword blade. What spread out obtained was an extremely strong defense and offensive power, while what Zhao Qi obtained was a large number of attacks. No matter how weak an attack is, as long as the number of attacks reaches a large number, it will still produce astonishing results. Just like ants. Murong Wanqing replied, an ant biting a person is not scary, and millions of ants are enough to bite a living person to pieces. On the arena, Spread Out was clearly aware of this. After sweeping through the waters of the Sea of Bitterness, his two sword blade storms became slower and slower. In the end, they stopped half a meter in front of Feng Zhaoqi and disappeared. Feng Zhaoqi swung his sword and it was a sword light, and that sword light seemed to be condensed from water. Spread Out's light sword slashed down and cut off Feng Zhaoqi's sword light. However, Feng Zhaoqi's sword light scattered into countless water droplets and attacked Spread Out like a gust of wind and rain. At this moment, Feng Zhaoqi's indestructible body had been cut in many places, and blood had seeped out. What a strange sword intent! Spread Out finally became serious and said, since long-range attacks are useless against you, then let's try melee combat. Thunder like lightning. Spread Out's body suddenly disappeared and appeared behind Feng Zhaoqi in the next moment. Almost at the same time, Feng Zhaoqi's body suddenly floated out horizontally, dodging the sword coming from behind Spread Out. That Spread Out's body disappeared again, and when he reappeared, he had already transformed into 4 afterimages due to his speed. Feng Zhaoqi tilted his head slightly, as if he was listening to something with his ears. When the 4 afterimages of Spread Out attacked at the same time, Feng Zhaoqi's body drifted along with the waves again, continuously swaying left and right, perfectly avoiding every attack of Spread Out. At the same time, Feng Zhaoqi was able to counterattack while dodging, hacking out a water-shaped sword light. The 2 crossed swords were blocked, but who knew that the water-shaped sword light would not be able to block it? Once under his crotch, the water-shaped sword light would collapse into countless droplets of sword blades that sliced into his body. The sword wounds spread out all over his body. After every attack, the sword wounds would widen a little. From the beginning, they were only as thin as spider silk, to now, they were as wide as hair. He actually dodged. Xian Long's eyes widened. Lao Zhan's speed is so fast that he can be dodged. Spread Out held the sword in both hands and gasped slightly, no wonder you blindfolded your eyes. It turns out that you sacrificed your vision for a more sensitive sense of hearing and touch. Night-ripping slash. Feng Zhaoqi's sword trembled as hundreds of small sword arcs scattered out. Spread Out's 2 swords crossed. This time, he condensed a Yuan Qi shield. After the hundreds of small sword arcs collided with the Yuan Qi shield, each sword arc collapsed into more than 100 water droplet sword blades. Ding 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 ding. Countless water droplets of sword blades frantically sliced through the Yuan Qi shield. The shield doubled in size at the first breath, and was completely exhausted at the second breath. The third breath of water droplets of sword blades scattered all over his body. The dense sword wounds on Spread Out's body that were as thick as strands of hair continued to expand, and they were already as wide as steel needles. So that's how it is. I've already seen through your sword intent. Spread Out took a deep breath and walked towards Feng Zhaoqi with his 2 swords in hand. Feng Zhaoqi waved his hand and a sword light appeared. Spread Out went straight ahead, not dodging nor dodging. When the sword light hit his body, it immediately dissipated into thousands of water droplets of sword blades. He actually didn't dodge. Isn't that courting death? The audience was so nervous that they didn't dare to breathe out a single mouthful. Xiang Nan and Murong Wanqing exchanged glances and saw the worry in each other's eyes. After the tens of thousands of water droplets collided with spread out's body, they spun crazily. They were really thousands of small sword blades that were constantly cutting and spreading away. As for spread out, he used his own body to take the initiative to withstand the attack of the water droplets. At this moment, he suddenly struck out with his sword. This sword strike was no longer blocked by water droplets. Furthermore, it was using a speeding sword light. Although the sword light didn't have any energy, it wasn't huge, but its speed was extremely fast, hitting Feng Zhaoqi's chest with a chi sound. Feng Zhaoqi was struck back a few steps. Large amounts of blood flowed out from his chest, and spread out sacrificed his body as a price in exchange for the best opportunity to attack. However, the dense sword wounds on his body were as thick as a large steel needle. Maybe I can't break your attack, but I don't have to. Maybe you can dodge my attack, but the moment you attack, it's when you lose the chance to dodge. Spread out, stained with blood, continued walking towards Feng Zhaoqi. Feng Zhaoqi tilted his head slightly and chopped a water dragon with his sword. Spread out's body flashed and he directly collided with the water dragon. At the same time, he shouted, "Shadow stance, wind roar." The two sword blade storms rose from the ground, almost simultaneously with Feng Zhaoqi's sword-chopping movements. Only when a person attacked would their perfection of dodging be greatly reduced. The water dragon swallowed spread out and transformed into water droplets of sword blades that filled the sky as it frantically sliced apart spread out. The two sword storms also engulfed Feng Zhaoqi, and the sharp sword blades violently cut Feng Zhaoqi's body. The two of them flew backwards at the same time, and two bloody mist shot out from the sky. Thunder like lightning. Spread out suddenly disappeared and appeared behind Feng Zhaoqi. Feng Zhaoqi followed the waves and dodged spread out's attack. Then, he struck back with his sword and shot out with his sword blade. Spread out directly used his body to hit the sword blade. Peng's sound crashed the sword blade into countless droplets of water, and it also slashed down with a backhand sword. The two of them were once again hit head-on by the other party. Both of them flew backwards, and red blood swept across them. Chapter 310 Double Sword Striving for Heroism, End. How could this be? The spectators were shocked and their hearts were beating wildly. The two of them have already lost so much blood. How can they still fight? This level of blood loss should have stopped moving long ago. The blood of the two people on the arena had already gathered into a red river, flowing back and forth along with the strong winds of the battle. Those two fellows were completely exchanging their lives for their own. Every time they attacked each other, they would completely withstand each other's sword Dao damage. Ordinary people would lose so much blood. Not to mention losing their ability to move, it was very likely that they were already dead. However, the two of them relied on their strong willpower to support themselves. After the fight, the two of them simply didn't even dodge. That spread out's body turned into 4 afterimages, and the 4 afterimages chopped out 4 sword lights. Feng Zhaoqi's sword trembled and hundreds of sword arcs appeared. Hundreds of sword arcs collapsed into tens of thousands of water droplets. Pu-pu-pu. 2 kinds of cutting sounds sounded from the two of them. The sound of Feng Zhaoqi being attacked was heavy and clear. The sound of spread out being attacked was light but intense. The two of them were both injured at the same time, but they also counterattacked at the same time. Pooh! Spread Out's sword pierced through Feng Zhaoqi's stomach. Ding 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 ding. Feng Zhaoqi also stabbed down with his sword, causing countless water droplets to sweep through Spread Out's abdomen, creating a piercing wound. Blood sprayed out from their backs, and they took a few steps back at the same time. Feng Zhaoqi landed on the ground and glided forward along with the waves. After 3 consecutive sword beams fell, he soared into the air and slashed 3 more times. After Spread Out used his body to break through the 3 sword lights, both swords slashed down on Feng Zhaoqi's legs at the same time. When the 3 swords landed in the air, Spread Out continued to charge upwards. He used his body to charge out of Feng Zhaoqi's 3 sword lights and counterattack twice. The 2 of them instantly separated, and both of them were thrown to the edge of the arena. Whoosh whoosh. Feng Zhaoqi was panting weakly. His body was trembling as he tried to stand up, but he tried several times but failed. His legs were already crippled. Spread Out's sweat and blood mixed together. He sat cross-legged with his hands on his sword. He could not stand up with this kind of strength. Both of them have reached their limits. Xiang Nan frowned and said, "If this continues, it will be terrible. Even if they stop attacking each other, they can die at any time. I can still fight." What about you?" Sharp light flashed in Spread Out's eyes. "I'll accompany you to the end." Feng Zhaoqi's left arm and legs were completely crippled. His right hand chiseled the ground with the hilt of the sword and his body pounced toward Spread Out. There wasn't a single piece of intact skin on his body. He opened his mouth and spat out a fierce yuan qi. With the help of the rebound force, his body also headed towards Feng Zhaoqi. The 2 of them flew into the air. The moment the 2 of them brushed past each other, their swords slashed randomly again. Then, with 2 pu sounds, the 2 of them stumbled and fell onto the ground not far away. The 2 of them were lying on the arena. Streams of blood slowly gushed out from their backs, and their entire bodies were soaked in blood. The valley was terrifyingly quiet. No one had expected this battle to be so extreme. Even though the last 2 of them were on the verge of death, they were still working. However, at this moment, the 2 of them were lying motionless in a pool of blood. The audience became restless. The 10 referees looked at each other, not knowing how to judge. "Old John, stand up. As long as you stand up, you will win." Xiang Long shook his big arm and shouted. "Zhao Qi, come on." Li Qingchuan shouted loudly. "Look, someone is moving." The spectators pointed at the arena in shock. Feng Zhaoqi and Spread Out moved at the same time. Spread Out held the sword in his hand and threw it at Feng Zhaoqi. However, he was already at his limit. The sword didn't even possess any power. When he was still 2 steps away from Feng Zhaoqi, the sword actually landed on the ground with a clanging sound. Feng Zhaoqi was also prepared to launch a counterattack, but he sat down on the ground again, his right hand holding the sword twitching. "Old John! Stand up!" Xiang Long roared angrily. Spread Out gritted his teeth, the veins on his forehead bulging and swaying. He really stood up. "It's broken." The audience was filled with despair. "He's already injured like that. Why can he still stand up?" Spread Out stood on the arena, facing Feng Zhaoqi. He opened his mouth and wanted to speak, but at this moment, the wounds on his entire body suddenly collapsed. Blood arrows shot out from his countless wounds. In the end, Spread Out stood on the arena and didn't move at all. "Hurry up and take a look." A referee quickly rushed onto the arena and touched Spread Out's neck with his fingers. Later, He nodded to the other referees and said, "Dead." Then, the referee quickly came to Feng Zhaoqi's side and touched his neck with his hand. At this moment, Feng Zhaoqi's life and death affected the hearts of everyone present. It was very likely that the first draw of the 12 joint examinations would come soon, and it would end with the death of both parties at the same time. Everyone's gazes were focused on the referee's hands. Later, the referee turned to look at the other referees and said, "He is still alive, but he is not far from death." Hearing this, more than 100,000 spectators in the valley stood up at the same time, howling hysterically. "Feng Zhaoqi, win this battle." The referee announced the result on the spot. The audience was going crazy, throwing everything in their hands into the sky. Win! He really won. Since the start of the tournament, apart from Xiang Long admitting defeat, the Heavenly Profound sect had welcomed its first defeat. At that moment, everyone's voice belonged to Feng Zhaoqi. Save her! Xiang Nan and Muron Wanqing were the first to charge forward. Don't touch him! Xiang Nan immediately stood in front of everyone. He gently probed Feng Zhaoqi's breath and said, "I can barely detect his breathing and heartbeat. I can't touch him now. Otherwise, Zhaoqi will die immediately. Leave it to me." An old man walked over from the sky. As the old man walked, he drank the strong liquor in his gourd. Half a gourd senior. Everyone was overjoyed. The half gourd landed on the arena and spilled wine all over Feng Zhaoqi's body. As soon as the spirits came into contact with Feng Zhaoqi's body, they immediately began to smoke. Cough! Feng Zhaoqi raised his neck and finally coughed. The half gourd said drunkenly, "You brats continue to fight. Feng Zhaoqi is handed over to this old man to keep him alive." With that, half of the gourd rolled up Feng Zhaoqi with its yuan qi and stepped into the air. The audience cheered and cheered. Everyone was chanting a name in their hearts, Feng Zhaoqi. Not only was Feng Zhaoqi the first martial artist to defeat the Profound Sky sect as a martial artist on the Blue Tide continent. At the same time, his victory had awakened the hope in everyone's hearts. The experts of the Profound Sky sect were not invincible. We still have a chance. Chapter 311 Tiger Tomb. Too powerful. Those two people are truly too powerful. Even the contestants of the 12 joint examinations were moved. In that battle, they fought so hard that they didn't fear death. He had unleashed the blood energy of a man. Blood for blood, injury for injury, life for life. Feng Zhaoqi fulfilled his promise that the sword in his hand would not be defeated twice by the same person. "I want to enter the sword sect." Li Qingchuan clenched his fists and said, "I must follow senior brother Zhao Qi's footsteps and become an outstanding sword Dao expert like him." In the final 8 competition, the first match was a wonderful performance for everyone. In the first group, the second battle in the morning would be played by Xiang Nan. Xiang Nan of the Haran sect fought against Chen Hao of the white-clothed sect. There was no surprise in this battle. After Xiang Nan released all of his strength last time, he did not hold back and easily won. After a short break at noon, the 2 matches in the afternoon arrived. In the first battle, the Haran sect's Chu Yan fought against the spirit sect's Gu Mulan. That Chu Yan was an expert who had fought Yi Dong heartily, and she similarly won by an overwhelming advantage. In the afternoon's second battle, the nature sect's Hongbin fought against the heavenly profound sect's Xiang Long. Everyone became nervous again. That was Xiang Long, the invincible Xiang Long. "I've seen you play Xiang Nan." Xiang Long hugged his shoulders and said, "If you are a man, don't admit defeat." Hongbin said angrily, "Don't look down on people. If you want to fight, fight." Shit, Hong Bin was infuriated the moment he got up. This is not a good thing. Chu Yan was very worried about Hong Bin's safety. She said, Hong Bin, admit defeat if you really can't. It's not embarrassing if you can't defeat such a monster. Hey, I know. Hong Bin smiled. However, everyone's mood did not relax. They knew how strong Hong Bin's self-esteem was. Indeed, as soon as the battle started, Xiang Long had already transformed. He knew how strong Hong Bin was, so he wouldn't do any meaningless probing. Hong Bin did not save his strength and directly put on the white tiger armor. The two of them charged at each other wildly, and the arena that shook as Xiang Long ran rumbled. As Hong Bin charged forward, a fierce Yuan Qi tiger enveloped his body. One bull and one tiger collided head-on. Boom! The giant Yuan Qi tiger opened its bloody mouth and bit toward Xiang Long's neck. As for Xiang Long, he was even more formidable. He directly inserted both of his hands into the tiger's mouth, and then with a snort, the tiger's mouth was torn to the left and right. Hong Bin's right leg condensed a Yuan Qi tiger head and kicked towards Xiang Long. Xiang Long arrived first. His heavy foot and Hong Bin's right foot were kicked together. In an instant, the Yuan Qi tiger's head was shattered. With a cracking sound, Hong Bin flew backwards. The calf bone in his right leg had been kicked to pieces. What kind of power is this? Hong Bin is wearing the white tiger armor. Everyone sucked in a breath of cold air. Hong Bin's face flushed red as he used his left leg to support the ground. Then, he pounced towards Xiang Long. Roar! In the valley, a tiger's roar resounded throughout the heavens and earth. Moo! Xiang Long's barbaric bull's cry was similarly intimidating. Hong Bin swung his hands and used all of his strength to slap down. The two Yuan Qi tiger heads heavily smashed onto both sides of Xiang Long's head. Boom! As for Xiang Long, he lowered his head and used his feet to pierce Hong Bin's chest. Hong Bin! Chu Yan panicked and ran to the arena. Hong Bin sprinted with blood from his chest and flew backwards. Halfway through, he performed a backward somersault and barely managed to stand on his left leg. Xiang Long shook his head and felt a little dizzy. Alright, this strike is not bad. In contrast, Xiang Long was only slightly dizzy from being photographed, but Hong Bin was in a very miserable situation. Although the piercing wounds on his chest from the two horns did not hurt his heart, his situation was very bad. Hong Bin waved his fists repeatedly, sending out tiger heads filled with Yuan Qi. Xiang Long straightened his body and walked towards Hong Bin with large strides. He casually waved his big, thick arms and slapped the Yuan Qi tiger heads away one by one. The tiger god descended from the mortal world. Hong Bin used his strongest move, transforming into a fierce tiger of light and pouncing towards Xiang Long. Xiang Long suddenly sprinted like a wild bull, jumping up and down, his body spinning rapidly, using his head to block the radiant tiger. Boom! The radiant tiger was smashed into pieces by Xiang Long's head. Immediately after, two horns pierced through Hong Bin's stomach. Because Xiang Long's body was rotating, a pair of horns started twisting crazily in Hong Bin's stomach. Hong Bin, admit defeat. Chu Yan covered her mouth, her eyes turning red. However, it was too late. Hong Bin's stomach had already been ground into meat paste, and the two halves of his body split apart with a snort. His upper and lower body fell on the edge of the arena. Hong Bin, don't move, we'll save you. Xiang Nan and the others were shocked and hurriedly rushed forward. Xiang Nan gritted his teeth and shouted. Hongbin raised his head and looked at Xiang Nan. Good, cough, what a pity. I originally wanted to have a good fight with you. Looks like there's no chance. Xiang Nan, you are the one who defeated me. You, cough cough, you bastard must not, cough, lose. As he spoke, Hongbin slowly closed his eyes. Ah, 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 ah. Xiang Nan clenched his fists and his eyes turned red, roaring out the anger in his heart. Ha! What's there to be sad about? Standing on the arena, Xiang Long hugged his shoulders and said, the weak deserve to die. You lunatic, shut up. Xiang Nan's eyes reddened and he angrily said, do you still have any humanity? You actually can still laugh. What is human nature? Xiang Long laughed loudly. It's always been like this to become a king and defeat a bandit. Even if Lao Zhan dies, we won't be sad for him. Die because of incompetence. If you are incompetent, you have no right to live. Xiang Nan clenched his fists and gritted his teeth. You'd better not be in the same group as me. Otherwise, I'll make you regret it. Xiang Long laughed and walked down the arena. In the battle for the top 8, the first group of battles had all ended. That night, Xiang Nan went to find Chu Yan. When he found Chu Yan, she was quietly sobbing in her room. Seeing this scene, Xiang Nan couldn't help but sigh, my condolences. Chu Yan glanced at Xiang Nan and said, what are you doing here? Jiang Qing betrayed us, and Hongbin and Xian Yong also died in battle. Are you here to pity me? I don't need anyone's sympathy. Xiang Nan opened his mouth and said, although I have always been at odds with Hongbin, when the Haran sect was in trouble, he stood up without hesitation. He died a heroic death, a man with iron bones. Xiang Nan spread out his right hand, and there was a storage ring in his palm. He said, this is what I obtained when I fought Hongbin. Originally, I wanted to bury this relic of his in the Haran mountain range as a memorial. But I think that there might be something very important inside. Let the Hong clan handle it. Chu Yan took the storage ring and her eyes began to turn red again. She choked up and said, Xiang Nan, are you afraid? Perhaps we will all end up like Hongbin. Afraid? Xiang Nan said frankly, but what I'm afraid of is not death, but failure. I'm afraid that I've let down the nature sect's nurturing of me, and I'm afraid that I've let down the sect master's trust. Chapter 312 Su Bufan. Hearing this, Chu Yan was slightly stunned and said, are you really not afraid of death? Xiang Nan sat down and said, no one is not afraid of death. At least, no one is willing to die. However, things have already reached this stage. Many of our junior brothers have already died for the dignity of the Blue Tide continent. If I am destined to die, I hope that I can die on the battlefield like senior brother Hongbin. Hearing this, a trace of disappointment flashed in Chu Yan's eyes. Xiang Nan, I'm sorry, we treated you like that earlier. I didn't expect you to be willing to accept us with such a generosity. Xiang Nan smiled brightly and reached out to wipe away the tears for Chu Yan. We are all young people. The past is just a battle of wills between young people. But compared to the calamity of our country, what is that little friction worth? We are only Haran sect disciples at this moment. We have no other status. Yes. Chu Yan nodded and said, did your little bird steal this ring? Yes. Xiang Nan's face turned red, and when Little Sparrow heard other people talking about him, he immediately raised his head and looked arrogant. What kind of arrogance are you? Xiang Nan felt embarrassed and lightly flicked the bird's forehead. Seeing this scene, Chu Yan couldn't help but laugh. Then, her eyes moved and she said, "Oh right, I remember that King Sparrow seal of yours was also used to release it, right?" "Right," Xiang Nan said. Chu Yen said, "Then you must protect this bird well. If something happens to it, you won't be able to release the King Sparrow seal. You can't become a bird by yourself, right?" Xiang Nan's body jerked for a while, and he hurriedly grabbed Chu Yan's shoulder and said, "What did you say?" Chu Yanqi said, I want you to protect the bird." "Something's wrong." "The last sentence?" Xiang Nan asked excitedly. Chu Yan was confused and said, "You can't turn into a bird by yourself, right?" "Ah. Yes. Yes. Why am I so stupid?" Xiang Nan patted his forehead. As he spoke, Xiang Nan pushed open the door and ran without a trace. Chu Yan sat blankly on the spot and said, What did I say wrong?" "Sun Peak." Xiang Nan stood on the top of the mountain and muttered to himself, "There's no reason why I can't do it. I'm a divine grade lightning meridian's innate. There's no reason why I can't do it. Divine talent, isn't it possible to do something difficult that no one else can do? There are infinite possibilities. Mortal, spirit, earth, heaven, and divine grade 5 talent represented the strength of affinity to the attributes of the 5 meridians. Mortal grade was the weakest, and could only vaguely sense the corresponding attribute power. Heavenly grade was the strongest, and heavenly grade fire vein experts could even dance wildly in the flames. There were many things that could be accomplished by spirit grade fire veins. Ordinary grade fire veins were unable to accomplish, while earth grade fire veins were unable to accomplish anything that could be accomplished by spirit grade fire veins. When his talent reached the divine grade, it was almost equivalent to Xiang Nan being able to do anything he could think of. Divine grade meant that it was all-encompassing and possessed countless possibilities. Xiang Nan took a deep breath and began to form seals with his hands. The next day, the second group of battles began. In the first match of the morning, the Haoren sect's Muron Wanqing fought against the Blazing Fire sect's Zhang Zhongwei. Muron Wanqing simply crushed Zhang Zhongwei and won. In the second match, Jiang Cheng of the Profound Sky sect fought against Qian Jun of the Azure Cloud sect. Jiang Cheng used his terrifying water vein talent, water transformation body, ice. He froze Qian Jun into an ice sculpture and won. The third match was between Jiang Yu of the Haoren sect and Yi Dong of the Heavenly Profound sect. Jiang Yu did not have any hesitation. He immediately admitted defeat, but no one blamed her. Everyone had witnessed Chu Yan's abilities. As senior sister Jiang Yu, Chu Yan had lost to Yi Dong. Jiang Yu did not have to risk her life. In the fourth battle, the Nature sect's Shen Lin Hai fought against the Heavenly Profound sect's Su Bufan. This was the final battle of the final 8 battles. The winner would enter the final 8 and participate in the following 4 battles. Lin Hai, be careful. Muron Wanqing instructed that Su Bufan's martial skill is very strange. Don't let him touch your body. Shen Lin Hai nodded solemnly, don't worry, I've already seen him fight several battles. I know. Then, the two of them stepped onto the arena. After the referee announced the start of the match officially began. Because Feng Zhaoqi had defeated Spread Out of the Profound Sky sect earlier, everyone had high hopes for this match. Everyone was looking forward to a second miracle. Shen Lin Hai was a heavy-duty weapon user. He did not have a fixed weapon. Sometimes, he would use a huge saber, and most of the time, he would use a war hammer and axe. In fact, amongst the disciples of the 5 great families, Shen Lin Hai could be considered a strength-type martial artist. Unfortunately, a Xiang Long appeared in the 12-sect joint examination. He suppressed all of Shen Linhai's sharpness, causing everyone to only know about Xiang Long and not Shen Linhai. This time, in order to deal with Su Bufan and gain more flexibility, Shen Linhai used a long saber. The blade was about 2 meters long, 5 fingers wide, and 2 fingers thick. Ready for the explosion. Su Bufan licked his index finger with an evil smile on his face. Shen Linhai took a deep breath and raised his hand to form a blade light. Su Bufan chuckled and his body suddenly shook. With a whoosh, he turned into a shadow and circled around the blade light, rushing towards Shen Linhai. When Su Bufan arrived in front of Shen Linhai, he stretched out his hand and landed on Shen Linhai's shoulder. Shen Linhai's body quickly retreated, and he slashed back again. After forcing Su Bufan to retreat, he immediately chased after Su Bufan. Shen Linhai's saber technique was like a surging river, imposing and grand, never giving Su Bufan a chance to retaliate. Su Bufan was in a sorry state and hastily dodged Shen Linhai's attack. He had searched for several opportunities to attack Shen Linhai, but he had never succeeded. Seeing this, Xiang Nan and the others heaved a sigh of relief. From the looks of it, Su Bufan's hard strength should be the weakest among the 5 people of the Profound Sky sect. The reason why Su Bufan was able to win one after another was because he possessed a unique martial skill that could touch someone's body and cause them to explode. In terms of combat ability alone, he wasn't even Shen Linhai's opponent. Shen Linhai opened and closed the door, hacking 13 times in a row. Finally, one of his sabers hit Su Bufan's shoulder. However, at that time, Su Bufan's right hand also reached out to Shen Linhai's chest. Shen Linhai could only clench his teeth and retreat. He did not slash the saber too deeply. He only left a saber wound on Su Bufan's shoulder and could not see his entire arm. Ha! Shen Linhai took a deep breath and said, "I've already seen your trick. As long as you don't touch it, you will definitely lose." Nonsense! Su Bufan's face was filled with anger. As he spoke, Su Bufan's body flickered and he once again bullied Shen Linhai. Shen Linhai also shook, and the two of them brushed past each other. Su Bufan turned his hand back and touched Shen Linhai's back. Shen Linhai retaliated with a saber, separating Su Bufan's hand with the back of the saber, leaving the blade behind for Su Bufan's back. Pooh! With a single slash, Su Bufan staggered and fell onto the arena. There was a shocking knife wound on his back. In order to isolate Su Bufan's hand, this saber slashed a little sideways. Otherwise, it should have hit the spine. The audience boiled over. Could it be that the second victory was coming? Bastard! Su Bufan struggled to get up from the ground and angrily said, "How dare you hurt me?" Chapter 313 An Unfathomable Martial Skill. "Come on, Shen Linhai, kill him!" The audience shouted loudly. Victory was imminent. Shen Linhai was already confident. The long saber in his hand trembled, and the Tao Tao Yuan Qi surged out. Whoo! A saber slashed past, carrying with it a magnificent saber wind. Su Bufan dodged awkwardly and was sent flying by the strong wind. Shen Linhai chased after him again, and Su Bufan's eyes already flashed with ruthlessness. He gritted his teeth and said, "Damn bastard, it's too early for you to be arrogant." As he spoke, Su Bufan suddenly waved his hand. Under everyone's gaze, Shen Linhai, who was chasing after Su Bufan, suddenly soared into the air. After a dozen rounds in the sky, he fell heavily to the ground. What? Even if you don't touch your body, you can still injure the enemy? Everyone paled in shock. Just now, when Su Bufan raised his hand, he was at least 7 to 8 meters away from Shen Linhai, but what had knocked Shen Linhai over? Shen Linhai stood up from the ground, his face full of disbelief. He lowered his head to look at his chest and found that there was a deep bruise on his chest. This Shen Linhai gritted his teeth and began to run quickly. He drew a huge arc around Su Bufan and continuously chopped down the saber towards Su Bufan. Saber rays shot towards Su Bufan from all directions. Su Bufan raised his right hand high up and suddenly slid down. Whoosh! With a crisp whip sound, all of the saber light that Shen Linhai hacked out broke. Su Bufan jumped up and waved his hand, causing Shen Linhai's entire body to suddenly soar into the sky. Die! Su Bufan gritted his teeth and chopped down with his right hand. Whoosh! Shen Linhai felt as if he had been heavily hit, and his body suddenly shot backwards. After he landed on the ground, a wound had already appeared on his forebody, sliding from his left shoulder to his right crotch. Blood gushed out of his wound as his flesh and blood rolled out. What the hell is that? Everyone was incomparably shocked. Just what method did Su Bufan use to injure Shen Linhai? Could it be air? Murong Wanqing frowned and said, could it be that Su Bufan can attack the air with his bare hands and then attack Linhai with the air? But this is too fantastic. Even Murong Wanqing felt that what she said was unlikely, but at present, there seemed to be no other explanation. Xiang Nan carefully observed Su Bufan's right hand, wanting to see exactly how Su Bufan's martial skill was released. Shen Linhai endured the intense pain and stood up from the ground. He stubbornly ran towards Su Bufan. Su Bufan laughed heartily as he sprinted towards Shen Linhai. By the time the two of them were 10 meters apart, Shen Linhai had already raised his saber high. Su Bufan's right hand suddenly gripped the void, and then he jumped forward. Pooh! Before Shen Linhai could land his saber, his body immediately stopped, and a circular piercing wound appeared on his stomach. Moreover, his body was still floating in the air, and his feet were only about a foot away from the ground. How on earth did you do it? The contestants looked at each other in disbelief. What's going on? Xiang Nan's heart skipped a beat. He carefully observed Su Bufan's right hand, trying to find signs of that martial skill. He had already sensed that when Su Bufan was attacking, the yuan qi in his body rapidly condensed towards his right hand, but then, there was no more. When a large amount of yuan qi condensed into Su Bufan's palm, it was as if it had suddenly disappeared. Could it be that, as Murong Wanqing had said, Su Bufan attacked the air, and the air attacked Shen Linhai even further? There was such a peculiar martial skill in the world. Shen Linhai was also considered strong. He struggled to free himself and covered his stomach while panting. Fortunately, there were no injuries to his heart and other important parts. However, he was afraid that one of his intestines had already been broken. A martial artist could still endure such injuries. Shen Linhai roared unconvincingly and raised his saber to attack. Linhai, be careful. Don't fight him head-on. He can use the air to hurt you. Murong Wanqing shouted. It was like a martial artist kicked a tree and that tree flew out and smashed the enemy. Shen Linhai woke up like a dream. He excitedly grasped the saber and continued to charge straight at Su Bufan. Really, is that all? Xiang Nan frowned. He always felt that something was wrong. Where did the yuan qi disappear from Su Bufan's hand go? Su Bufan laughed heartily. He raised his right hand and then waved it abruptly. At this moment, Shen Linhai suddenly turned around. He used his gaze to create a virtual stone between himself and Su Bufan. If Su Bufan hit the stone, then the stone would only be smashed towards him in a straight line. Shen Linhai cleverly circled around this stone and his body slid in an arc. Xiang Nan held his breath and concentrated on sensing the direction of Yuan Qi in Su Bufan's body. When a martial artist released different martial skills, the way Yuan Qi flowed through his meridians was also different. Xiang Nan wanted to use all possible means to sense Su Bufan's way of circulating Yuan Qi. But it was still that moment. Su Bufan's Yuan Qi circulated in a very ordinary manner without any tricks, but when a large amount of Yuan Qi condensed into Su Bufan's right hand, it disappeared again. "You this time," Shen Linhai shouted excitedly. Whoosh! Shen Linhai, who had already dodged Su Bufan's straight line, suddenly flew out and a huge laceration appeared on the side of his body. As Shen Linhai flew, Su Bufan raised his hands high and shouted, "Die!" His raised hands suddenly descended. Shen Linhai was heavily injured, but he raised his saber temporarily. Even he did not know what he wanted to block. However, he immediately felt a sharp pain coming from his waist. Immediately after, there was a loud bang and the saber in his hand suddenly sank. Shen Linhai's body rolled back again, and he immediately flipped out of the arena. As for his waist, it was almost sliced off. Fortunately, the long saber blocked it, otherwise, his body would have split up. Su Bufan won this battle. The referee announced the final result. Xiang Nan and the others hurriedly rushed forward to treat Shen Linhai's injuries. "Have you seen it clearly? How did you get hurt?" Muron Wanqing pressed down on Shen Linhai's wound and asked in a deep voice. Shen Linhai shook his head and said with a pale face, "I can't understand his martial skill at all." Beating cattle across the mountain. Luo Yuan frowned. "Very similar, but definitely not." Xiang Nan immediately rejected Luo Yuan's project. Beating a bull across a mountain was a description of a certain type of martial skill. It meant that if a part of one's body did not touch something, it could cause damage through the air. For example, if a person slashed a palm at a tree 5 meters away, a palm print would appear on the tree trunk. However, this kind of martial skill was very basic, relying on the palm wind. Although Zhang Feng couldn't see it, its power was negligible. No matter how strong the palm wind was, it was better to casually strike out with Yuan Qi. It was even more powerful than the palm wind in the Xiantian realm, and it was even more powerful than the palm wind in the Xiantian realm. Chapter 314 Top 4. The battle for the top 8 was officially over. The winning members of the first group were Feng Zhaoqi, Xiang Nan, Chu Yan and Xiang Long. The winning members of the second group were Muron Wanqing, Jiang Cheng, Yi Dong and Su Bufan. The 8 of them successfully advanced to the top 8. They would rest for the next 3 days and fight for the top 4 on the 4th day. After returning to the Haoran sect, everyone was worried. The most troublesome one was Su Bufan. Whether it was Xiang Long or Yi Dong Jiangcheng, at least the attacks of these people could be seen and felt. Su Bufan, on the other hand, was a big uncertain factor. This person's martial skill could be said to be of a different type, making it impossible for others to make a move. And what everyone was most worried about was this kind of opponent. You can't even see other people's martial skills, so how can you talk about dismantling them? In the evening, everyone gathered to think about countermeasures. Muron Wanqing's tone was solemn as she said, "Lin Hai's last move clearly dodged Su Bufan's straight-line attack, but he was still hit. Could it be that Su Bufan's martial skill can still turn around? If that's the case, then it would be too troublesome." Originally, he could not see the enemy's martial skill, but now, even the method of using his premonition to dodge was ineffective. "Everyone, go back and ask your master," Xiang Nan suggested. "Let's see if our master has ever heard of such a strange martial skill." Everyone split up and went to ask their own masters. From Su Caiyue's point of view, Xiang Nan only got 3 words: "I don't know." Su Caiyue had never heard of an invisible martial skill, because any martial skill was based on the weather or yuan qi. As long as it was a martial skill condensed from these 2 things, there was no such thing as not being able to see it. There was no need to say that a martial skill that was released with strength was a direct movement of the fist and feet, and there was no such thing as an invisible statement. When everyone gathered together, the answer was exactly the same. No peak master had ever heard of such a martial skill. They even thought that it was impossible for such a martial skill to exist in the world. "Then we'll be in big trouble." Xiang Nan took a deep breath and said, "In that case, Su Bufan's martial skill was also obtained from the ancient martial tomb." 3 days later, the battle for the top 4 began. This battle was not divided into groups. Each of the 8 contestants drew lots to determine their opponents. The battle list was as follows. The first battle of the top 4, Xiang Nan vs Su Bufan. Game 2, Murong Wanqing vs Jiang Cheng. Game 3, Feng Zhaoqi vs Xiang Long. The fourth match, Chu Yan, against Yi Dong again. At this point in the battle, all outer sect disciples had been eliminated. Of the remaining 8 contestants, 4 were from the Haran sect and 4 were from the Profound Sky sect. This was already the final match between the true experts in this joint exam. There was absolutely no water at all. No one could rely on luck to advance. For nature returning sect martial practitioners of the 3rd level fought against 3 of the 5th level and 1 of the 3rd level heavenly profound sect martial practitioners of the 3rd level of the origin returning sect. The winning rate was already very low. Moreover, when the referee publicly announced another matter, everyone's mood fell to the bottom. Because Feng Zhaoqi and Spread Out were badly injured in the battle, Feng Zhaoqi still hadn't woken up from his coma. The referee announced on the spot that Feng Zhaoqi was absent from the final 4 and abstained. Xiang Long won without a fight. Upon hearing this news, the hearts of all the spectators were overshadowed. Before the battle started, he had already lost. No one blamed Feng Zhaoqi, but everyone was worried about the fate that followed. Now that he had become 3 nature sect disciples and fought against 4 heavenly profound sect disciples, his chances of winning were already low to the freezing point. Now, let's invite the contestants from both sides to the first battle. The referee announced loudly. Xiang Nan and Su Bufan stepped onto the arena at the same time. "Xiang Nan, be careful," Mo Hai shouted from below the arena. Everyone was moved. Xiang Nan was one of the biggest dark horses in the joint exam. Until now, apart from Feng Zhaoqi, who had surpassed Xiang Nan with outstanding performance, Xiang Nan was the most promising contestant in everyone's hearts to defeat the Profound Sky sect. However, when Xiang Nan encountered someone who couldn't do it, he encountered Su Bufan, who was unfathomable and impossible to see through. This time, everyone was extremely worried, thinking that no matter how strong Xiang Nan was, he would definitely not be able to use it. "I declare that the first match of the final 4 will officially begin." The referee signaled the battle. "Ha ha ha, Xiang Nan, leave your life to me." Su Bufan laughed arrogantly. He clenched his fist in his right hand and suddenly swung it towards Xiang Nan. Whoosh! Xiang Nan tilted his head and a faint bruise appeared on his face. "What?" Su Bufan was stunned. You actually didn't fly out. Ha! That's right, Xiang Nan can't be defeated by an attack of his level. The audience cheered again. They suddenly remembered that when Xiang Nan fought Hong Bin, he had released his full strength and was already extremely powerful. Even Hong Bin's essence tiger head could be blocked by Xiang Nan with one hand. Hey, so what? Su Bufan's expression changed. No matter how hard you resist, you will still be injured. Let's see how long you can last. Xiang Nan expressionlessly touched the bruises on his face. Then, he held the saber in both hands and slashed down at Su Bufan. The saber light released by the strong light whistled towards Su Bufan. Su Bufan smiled evilly, clenched his fist in his right hand, and swung it several times in the air. Whoosh! 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 Xiang Nan's saber light actually flickered 3 times in a row. However, Xiang Nan's saber light was not for fun. It actually continued to shoot towards Su Bufan intact. Ah! Unbreakable! Su Bufan's heart sank as he hurriedly dodged. The saber light stuck close to Su Bufan's body and slid over. Su Bufan broke out in cold sweat. He gritted his teeth and said, "Are you kidding me? I shattered all of Shen Linhai's saber lights with a single whip, but 3 whips couldn't shatter a single one of Xiang Nan's saber lights. These two are both at the 3rd level of origin return. How could there be such a huge difference in the strength of their origin chi?" Xiang Nan, amazing, Shen Linhai was supported by 2 people and barely sat on a wooden chair to watch the match. On the arena, Xiang Nan held a huge saber in his hand and walked towards Su Bufan step by step. Su Bufan gritted his teeth and said, "How about we try this move?" As he spoke, he raised both of his hands high up and slashed down abruptly. Xiang Nan frowned and flashed sideways, but then he felt as if something was wrapping around his waist, and then his body soared into the air. Su Bufan jumped up and clenched his fists, sweeping downwards heavily. Boom! An explosion came from Xiang Nan's back. His entire body was blasted to the ground. He rolled 3 times in a row, then he propped up his legs and stood up again. Whip? Curious, Xiang Nan lowered his head and looked at his waist. There was a bruise on his waist. Su Bufan was dumbfounded once again. He thought to himself, "This time, I pulled Shen Linhai to pieces. What is this Nan's body made of?" He actually resisted. Chapter 315 Su Bufan's Secret. Xiang Nan took a deep breath and said, "No matter how strange your martial skill is, if I defeat you with speed, your martial skill will not be able to be used." Thinking of this, Xiang Nan's body flickered and he immediately used the shadow steps. His body disappeared on the spot. When he reappeared, he was already standing behind Su Bufan with his huge saber raised high. He was about to land his saber. Su Bufan's pupils shrank and he quickly turned around. A determined expression flashed in his eyes. He did not dodge and instead touched Xiang Nan's chest. If this continued, Xiang Nan would definitely not be able to split Su Bufan in half with a single saber because he was too fast in his flash steps and didn't have enough time to accumulate strength. However, Su Bufan could touch Xiang Nan and risk his own serious injuries to explode Xiang Nan to death. He's going all out. Murong Wanqing anxiously said, "Hurry up and dodge." Xiang Nan's eyes twitched as he released the flash shadow steps again, and his body suddenly appeared 10 meters away. "Huh, Xiang Nan, what are you running for? Didn't you want to see me?" Su Bufan looked up and laughed. He jumped up and threw both of his hands at Xiang Nan. Xiang Nan raised his great saber and felt a powerful impact from the blade, causing him to slide half a meter backwards. On the surface of the arena on both sides of his body, there was a continuous rumbling explosion. Xiang Nan frowned. Then, he felt his waist tighten. His entire body was lifted up again. He brandished his saber and Su Bufan fled in a panic. However, Xiang Nan's body had already been pulled up, followed by a whoosh. Whoosh! After several consecutive attacks, they were all viciously thrown at Xiang Nan. Xiang Nan's robe had been completely shattered, leaving behind a few bruises on his chest and back. What a tough physical defense! Su Bufan felt that Xiang Nan was extremely troublesome. At this juncture, Xiang Nan lowered his head and pondered. Something was wrong. Most of Su Bufan's martial skills were unleashed in the form of a whip, but once, he was clearly struck by a hammer. What he had blocked with his saber earlier was more like a Yuan Qi spear thrown over by the enemy. How is this possible? Could it be that a single martial skill could actually release several different patterns? Or could it be that all of his martial skills were invisible? Whoosh! 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 The dense attacks landed on Xiang Nan's body, causing his body to shake, but he didn't move a single step. Su Bufan was getting fiercer and fiercer, but he was still unable to break through Xiang Nan's true defense. This made Su Bufan extremely angry. Whip, knife, hammer, damn it! Xiang Nan's eyes suddenly moved as he gritted his teeth and said, I was thinking in the wrong direction. I always thought that Su Bufan's martial skill was too special, that's why we couldn't see it. No wonder I noticed the circulation of Yuan Qi in his body, but I didn't notice anything unusual. So it's like this. What's going on, Xiang Nan? Luo Yuan hurriedly asked. Huh, stop pretending here. Can you see through my martial skill? Su Bufan jumped up and waved his hands. Xiang Nan quickly formed a seal with both of his hands. Then, he wiped his eyes, and a layer of lightning quickly covered his pupils. When he saw what was happening in front of him, Xiang Nan suddenly realized, sure enough, there was no mistake. As he spoke, Xiang Nan placed the giant saber behind him and raised his hands high. Immediately after, his hands clenched. At this moment, Su Bufan's waving hands also stopped. His pupils contracted rapidly. Impossible. This is impossible. A cold light flashed in Xiang Nan's eyes. He quickly moved his hands backwards, and Su Bufan, who was far away, actually fell in the direction of Xiang Nan. Ah, this is impossible. Su Bufan cried out in alarm as he raised his hands high up and fiercely slid towards Xiang Nan. Xiang Nan raised his left hand and waved his fingers in the air. Clang! With a crisp sound, a string of sparks burst out from Xiang Nan's two fingers. How did you see? Su Bufan's eyes were filled with fear. The spectators and contestants were also incomparably shocked. Xiang Nan said, since no one else can see it, I'll let it live. As he spoke, a ball of soft Yuan Qi was released from Xiang Nan's fingers. The Yuan Qi actually condensed into the shape of a saber in the air. But this saber is hollow, which means... I see. Luo Yuan patted his head and shouted, that bastard's Yuan Qi can be invisible. Hearing this, everyone immediately reacted. That's right. Xiang Nan nodded and said, we have always suspected that the martial skill he used is special, but in fact, he doesn't have any powerful martial skill. It's just that his peculiar technique can keep his Yuan Qi invisible. That's why he has always used his Yuan Qi to condense into the shape of a weapon to attack others. F***CK. Shen Linhai scolded, invisibility of Yuan Qi, you can indeed attack your opponent unexpectedly, invisibly injuring the enemy. While everyone was shocked by Su Bufan's Yuan Qi characteristics, they were also shocked by Xiang Nan's strength. Now, Su Bufan's invisible Yuan Qi saber had appeared. However, Xiang Nan actually used 2 fingers to block Su Bufan's blade. Shouldn't his fingers be cut off? Interesting, ha 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 ha, interesting. Xiang Long laughed excitedly, this Xiang Nan's Yuan Qi and physical strength are very good. I look forward to fighting him. Su Bufan stared at Xiang Nan in horror. He hurriedly released his Yuan Qi saber and clenched his fists as he jumped backwards, swinging it towards Xiang Nan. This time, without the help of Xiang Nan Yuan Qi, no one could see Su Bufan's weapon. As for Xiang Nan, he could clearly see that Su Bufan's hands had condensed a Yuan Qi warhammer, and it was smashing towards his head. Xiang Nan raised his left hand and with a boom, the warhammer landed on the back of Xiang Nan's hand, but Xiang Nan didn't even bow. Su Bufan hurriedly let go of his axe and formed another Yuan Qi whip with both of his hands. He used the whip to whip towards Xiang Nan. Xiang Nan tilted his head slightly and dodged the whip accurately. The whip whizzed in midair. He took out an empty space. Are you really able to see? Su Bufan's face was pale. Xiang Nan tilted his head and pulled out the huge saber from his back. Now, it's my turn, he said. As he spoke, Xiang Nan lowered his body and shot towards Su Bufan. Su Bufan hurriedly swung his whip, but he was simply unable to hit Xiang Nan, who was extremely fast. You're courting death. Su Bufan gritted his teeth and said, come on. Die together. As he spoke, Su Bufan reached out and touched Xiang Nan. Under Lei Liangguang's gaze, Xiang Nan finally understood why Su Bufan could touch someone else's body and they would explode. Thunder bomb. Haha. Xiang Nan shook his head and suddenly turned around, brushing past Su Bufan. On the arena, Su Bufan opened his mouth wide. His waist suddenly staggered, and both his body and lower body fell onto the arena at the same time. One blade, waist chop. Xiang Nan bent down and picked up an invisible ball from the ground. He squeezed open the surface of the ball's Yuan Qi, which was shockingly wrapped in a thunder bomb. Chapter 316 Invincible Yi Dong. Su Bufan's secrets were finally solved, and the audience couldn't help but curse him for being despicable and shameless. Previously, everyone had been panicking. As long as Su Bufan's body touched someone, he could make them explode. In the end, the truth was actually like this. Su Bufan used invisible Yuan Qi to wrap the thunder bomb around it, making it invisible as well. Then, when he fought against the enemy, he directly used Yuan Qi to inject the thunder bomb into the enemy's body. Of course, it was very difficult to use a strand of Yuan Qi to enter someone else's body and destroy all of their Yuan Qi. But thunder bombs were not Yuan Qi at all. He wasn't repelled by other people's meridians, but directly exploded. Pfft. Xiang Long spat in disdain and said, I already said that kid surnamed Su can't become a big shot by relying on his unscrupulous kung fu. This kind of three-legged cat is also worthy of accompanying the four of us. I have long since disliked him. Xiang Long's strength, Yi Dong's eyes, the unfolding sword, and Jiang Cheng's ice were all made of iron. Only Su Bufan, who had limited strength, could represent the profound sky sect to fight here. His only value was that he had learned a cultivation technique that could make Yuan Qi invisible in the ancient martial tomb. I declare. The referee raised his right hand and said, Xiang Nan won the first round of the final four. Everyone cheered and won. He won again. Now, the Blue Tide Continent's martial artists had finally begun to regain their defeat. As Xiang Nan cheered, he carried his saber and walked down the arena. You really are. Luo Yuan punched Xiang Nan on the shoulder and said, I'm afraid you're the only one who can see it. Otherwise, we'll be kept in the dark by that bastard Su Bufan. Xiang Nan also heaved a sigh of relief. Fortunately, he had a lightning eye. Otherwise, there was really nothing he could do about Su Bufan. Next, the second battle in the final four was Feng Zhaoqi's battle against Xiang Long. Because Feng Zhaoqi was still unconscious, Xiang Long won without a fight. In the third battle, Chu Yan fought Yi Dong. On the arena, Yi Dong had his right hand behind his back and said to Chu Yan, we meet again. Chu Yan took a deep breath and said, this time, I'm already on guard. You can't defeat me again. Yi Dong nodded, since this is the second time we have fought, there is no need to probe each other. Come directly. Yi Dong raised his right hand. Above his head, a flaming eyeball appeared and said, Eye of Blaze. Z. A beam of flames shot out from the flaming eyeball. Chu Yan didn't even dare to touch this thing. Even if she poured Yuan Qi into her legs, she nimbly jumped up and down the arena, constantly avoiding the pursuit of the flaming light beam. The flaming light beam swept around. Because the light beam was emitted from the pupils of the eyeballs, the pupils only needed to move by a very small amplitude. When the light beam reached Chu Yan's location, the amplitude of the light beam's movement would become very large. This made it impossible for Chu Yan to get close to Yi Dong, especially since the flame beams that shot out of her eyes were uninterrupted. It's a continuity. After dozens of successive dodges, Chu Yan found an opportunity and immediately launched the glory charge. She gathered a beautiful horse under her crotch and rushed towards Yi Dong. As for the blazing eyes, they gently moved, and the flaming beams that were shooting towards the ground instantly shot into the sky. Chu Yan's pupils contracted and her upper body abruptly raised backwards. She saw that the flaming light beam split the radiant beauty horse into two. The beam of light swept up from the back of the horse and stuck tightly to Chu Yan's chest. Almost. Almost. If Chu Yan leaned back at the same time at night, even if it was an instant, her entire body would be cut open. But this time, it also cut open Chu Yan's personal clothes. The waves in front of her chest surged, and she hurriedly used one hand to protect her chest. A strange cry sounded from the scene, both because of the thrill of the scene just now and because of the fragrance of the current scene. Sorry. Yi Dong said expressionlessly, I'll give you 5 seconds to change your clothes. Chu Yan's face was ashen. She took out a long robe from her storage ring and put it on her body. She said, come again. I know you've been defeated by the blazing eye again. I'm sure you won't accept it. Yi Dong said, you must think that I am too strong to fight you, right? Chu Yan did not say anything, but everyone, including her, thought so. Well, as you wish, I don't need to have my blazing eyes anymore. Yi Dong nodded and raised his right hand, saying, Eye of Glory. The flaming eyeballs in the sky suddenly turned golden. As for the golden eyeball, it looked downwards. Its huge pupils were aimed at Yi Dong, and a fan-shaped light shot down, wrapping Yi Dong inside. At this moment, Yi Dong's strength soared. His realm had soared from the 3rd level of origin return to the 4th level of origin return, and then to the 5th level of origin return. His entire body was shrouded in a golden light, and then the Eye of Glory closed its eyes. Come. Yi Dong nodded at Chu Yan. Make your move. Hiss. The audience gasped. What was that? Eye of Glory. It could actually raise Yi Dong's cultivation. No. It's not just a realm. Xiang Nan's eyes flashed with surprise. On the arena, Chu Yan had already condensed her light warhorse and rushed towards Yi Dong. Yi Dong, on the other hand, had his right hand behind his back and grabbed the horse's head with his left hand. The radiant horse actually stopped with a loud boom. Yi Dong loosened his left hand and sliced upwards. His palm was wrapped in a layer of golden light, splitting the radiant horse in two with one palm. The horse's head and neck parted at the same time. Ah! It's sharper than a knife. Li Qingchuan was stunned. When Chu Yan's radiant horse was beheaded, the spear in her hand also stabbed down on Yi Dong's chest. Clang! The spear struck Yi Dong's chest, but it was stopped by the golden light and was unable to penetrate it. Yi Dong's left hand descended, easily cutting off Chu Yan's spear of light. What are you doing? Chu Yan quickly retreated and raised her hands high. Glory, heavenly punishment. Hundreds of spears of light condensed in the sky and shot towards Yi Dong like a meteor shower. However, Yi Dong closed his eyes, his entire body shrouded in a dense rain of light spears, as if he was enjoying a true spring rain to his heart's content. Rumble, 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 rumble. A massive amount of Yuan Qi spears hit Yi Dong, but all of them exploded on the spot. Not a single ray of golden light could penetrate the surface of his body. After the glory heavenly punishment was over, Yi Dong calmly walked out from the billowing waves of fire. He was unharmed, not even his robe damaged. Why? Chu Yan's fighting spirit was completely extinguished. This was almost her strongest move. What? Isn't that Yuan Qi warrior condensed? Yi Dong took off a strand of hair from his head, then his right hand flashed, and the black hair flew out with a whoosh. Chu Yan hurriedly condensed a thick Yuan Qi shield, and after her light hair collided with the Yuan Qi shield, she let out a crisp, ding, sound. The Yuan Qi shield was completely shattered. Chu Yan's body was blasted backwards to the edge of the arena by the tremendous impact. It's him. Xiang Nan clenched his fists. It was him. The person who ambushed him that night was Yi Dong. He. Xiang Long hugged his shoulders and smiled. Old Yi's defense is something that even I have to risk my life to break. Chapter 317. As long as the champion. The two Azure Cloud sect elders whispered, people often say that martial arts experts can also be used as soldiers by picking flowers and flying leaves. I didn't expect that Yi Dong would be able to create such astonishing destructive power with just a single strand of soft hair. Another elder nodded silently. It can be seen that Yi Dong's martial arts attainments are extremely high. Under the arena, Jiang Yu was lost in thought. She picked up a strand of her own green silk and condensed it into Yuan Qi. Then, she quickly tossed it away. The hair slammed into the arena and immediately fell off. Jiang Yu sighed and said, "This hand is really beautiful. The hair is so slender, and the amount of Yuan Qi that can be condensed into it is very limited. However, he can let the hair exert such a powerful force. Compared to Yi Dong's hair, I'm afraid I don't even have 1% of his power. Let me try." Luo Yuan also came to join in the fun. He picked a strand of hair to condense Yuan Qi and threw it out. The result was not as effective as Jiang Yu. "Alright, stop playing. Let's watch the match." Murong Wanqing greeted. On the arena, Chu Yan was already standing on the edge. It seemed that she did not want to continue fighting. As for Yi Dong, His body was shrouded in a layer of golden light, and he didn't seem to want to continue attacking. Have you decided to admit defeat? Yi Dong put his hands behind his back and said, if I don't attack, what if you hit me? Bullying. Hearing this, Chu Yan condensed a radiant battle spear and rushed towards Yi Dong. As she ran, she gathered the light warhorse under her crotch and used the power of the warhorse to charge forward, fiercely stabbing Yi Dong's chest with a spear. Yi Dong only took a step back, and the golden light on his body was not lost. Chu Yan urged her warhorses to surround Yi Dong and unleash a dense offensive. One shot after another, she stabbed him. Yi Dong really did not retaliate and stood there expressionlessly, allowing Chu Yan to attack. Chu Yan discovered that this kind of attack could not break through Yi Dong's defense, so she jumped into the sky and used a glorious trial. This time, a huge amount of feathers shot towards Yi Dong's body, and then the feathers condensed into a huge sword of light. Aren't you going to hide? Xiang Nan's voice was heavy as he said, Chu Yan's strongest martial skill should be glory heavenly punishment, but the strongest individual martial skill should be the giant sword of glory judgment. Yi Dong, are you really confident that you can take a sword strike? If that's the case, then his strength is too terrifying. Sure enough, Yi Dong did not retaliate against the giant sword of light that fell from the sky. However, he did not use his head to receive it foolishly. Instead, he raised his right arm and used 2 fingers to clip it. The magnificent sword sliced through the sky and whistled as it slashed towards Yi Dong. However, Yi Dong used his 2 fingers to accurately grab the edge of the sword. The giant sword, on the other hand, remained motionless, unable to slash down the slightest bit. Chu Yan raised her hands high and pulled down forcefully, and the huge sword of light correspondingly increased the strength of its hacking. However, in everyone's eyes, the giant sword was already trembling in the air due to its excessive strength. It was still unable to cut down. All right. Chu Yan shouted loudly and waved her hand to disperse the giant sword of light. I admit defeat. There is no need for you to humiliate me like this. Yi Dong nodded and turned to walk down the arena, saying, sorry, I didn't mean to humiliate you. I made you misunderstand. This Yi Dong seems to be different from Xiang Long and the others, Shen Linhai said curiously. The way he speaks and does things is not excessive. Indeed. Murong Wanqing nodded and said, he clearly had a chance to kill Chu Yan, but he didn't. Why is that? On the arena, Chu Yan shouted at Yi Dong's back, I see that your character isn't bad either. Why do you want to join the Sky Profound sect? You and Xiang Long aren't on the same side. Yi Dong, you should return as soon as possible. Yi Dong stopped and turned to look at Chu Yan, saying, I didn't join Xiang Long and the others in the pollution. In fact, I don't like their actions either. Chu Yan was overjoyed and hurriedly said, then why do you still represent the Profound Sky sect? Why don't you leave the Profound Sky sect and stop helping them harm martial artists? Yi Dong shook his head and said, sorry, I can't do it. Why? Chu Yan asked unwillingly. The audience was also nervous. If they could rebel against Yi Dong at this time, it would undoubtedly be a huge blow to the Profound Sky sect. Yi Dong replied, I only have one goal, and that is to find an opponent that is on par with me. I will not help the Profound Sky sect kill people, but I will definitely not withdraw from the competition. I just want to have a good fight with a real expert. Regardless of what Yi Dong thought, his ultimate goal was to win the championship of the 12 joint examinations. If you win against our Haran sect, do you know how much damage the Heavenly Profound sect will bring to the Blue Tide continent? Chu Yan shouted harshly. I just want real experts to fight. "If you don't want me to win, then do your best to defeat me," said Yi Dong. Chu Yan was rendered speechless by Yi Dong's reply. Xiang Long and the others hugged their shoulders and stood under the arena, seemingly smiling but not smiling. They did not stop Chu Yan's dissuasion. Jiang Qing sneered, "Out of all of us, the one who is most unlikely to betray is Lao Yi, because no one can compare to his obsession with martial arts." Yi Dong's thoughts were very simple. Whether the enemy was the Haran sect or a second-class sect, it didn't matter. He only wanted to win. But in this way, if he really won the championship, it would still be equivalent to the Heavenly Profound sect winning. Yi Dong walked to the edge of the arena and suddenly stopped. His eyes floated towards Xiang Nan and he said, "I'm looking forward to fighting you." Xiang Nan walked out of the crowd and came to the edge of the arena. He whispered to Yi Dong, "You were the one who ambushed me that night." "It's me." Yi Dong did not conceal it. Xiang Nan nodded, "But you didn't do your best." "No." Yi Dong replied, "They asked me to kill you, but I want to openly determine the outcome with you on the arena. If I'm not mistaken, you're the one who stopped the white-clothed man from killing me." Xiang Nan asked again. Yi Dong replied with certainty, "It's also me." "All right." Xiang Nan said, "Although you are different from Xiang Long and the others, I will not give you the championship." Yi Dong nodded and walked down the arena. Next was the final battle of the final 4 battles. The 2 sides of this battle are Haran sect Murong Wanqing and Heavenly Profound sect Jiangcheng. The 2 of them had already stepped onto the arena and stood opposite each other. Murong Wanqing held a long sword in her hand, and Jiangcheng's weapon was also a sword. This time, there are some to see. Luo Yuan was excited, "Sunset is the strongest of us." Furthermore, "Sunset is fire, Yi Dong is ice." Shen Linhai said, "Now I declare that the final battle of the final 4 battles will officially begin." The referee waved his right hand heavily. Chapter 318 Where girls, with no thought of a perished kingdom. Murong Wanqing, "Do you hate me very much?" Jiangcheng smiled and said, "There's no need to deny it. From your eyes, I can tell." Murong Wanqing smiled faintly, "Hate? You think too highly of yourself. All I have is disgust for you. Although Yang Liener is not a good girl, she is deeply attached to you and willing to give up everything to follow you. Even if you don't want to accept it, there's no reason to kill her." "Ha!" Jiang Xingying heard the funniest joke in the world and said, "Women are just things outside of themselves. I don't believe in any love at all. When I become famous, there will be countless women competing to please me. Do you believe me? You still have some naive love dreams in your heart. That only means that you're from a good family. Trust me, women are very realistic. As long as I have money and power, they will follow me willingly, even if I'm just a dog." "Totally nonsense," Murong Wanqing said angrily. Jiangqing chuckled, "Am I talking nonsense? You know best in your heart that your brothers usually play with women, don't you? Do you really think those women like your brothers? They just want to climb up the Murong clan's high branch." Murong Wanqing gritted her teeth and said, "Those are just fireworks girls, broken flowers defeating willows. Our sect disciples are all women with integrity and dignity." "Oh. Really?" Jiangcheng touched his storage ring and said, "Today, I will teach you a lesson in life." At this point, the expressions of the non-girl spectators on the scene began to change. The other spectators and contestants felt a little impatient. Why didn't Murong Wanqing and Jiangqing fight? They were always chatting with each other. What was there to talk about with Jiang Qing? But now everyone suddenly realized that something was wrong. Jiang Qing shook his storage ring and hundreds of letters immediately landed on the arena. There were so many letters that there were probably 2,000 to 3,000 at most. Jiang Qing picked up a letter and said, "Don't look at the time when I killed Yang Liener a few days ago. All the spectators wanted to rush up and kill me, but what about them behind their backs? Do you know?" Jiang Qing tore open the letter in his hand and read, "Senior brother Jiang Qing, little girl Lu Tingting of Wind Moon sect has admired senior brother for a long time. I hope senior brother can take care of me when I go to the Nine Firmaments continent. Little girl is willing to help senior brother." In the spectator stands, in the direction of the Wind Moon sect, an elder of the Wind Moon sect stood up and pointed at a female disciple and angrily said, "Tingting, you are so shameless." The female disciple named Lu Tingting's face turned red with anxiety as she pointed at Jiang Qing on the arena and scolded, "You're shameless. You actually broke through my letter. Ha 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 ha." Jiang Qing looked up and smiled. He picked up the second letter and opened it. "I am a core disciple of the Azure Cloud sect, at the 5th level of the Origin Realm. Li Wanner has always admired senior brother Jiang Qing's elegant demeanor. I hope to marry him." The direction of the Azure Cloud sect instantly stirred up. Jiang Qing took the third letter and said, "Senior brother Jiang Qing is handsome and elegant. Junior sister has admired senior brother for a long time and looks forward to flying together with him. I am Zhao Xuemei of the Guihai sect. Ha, come and take a look. Not only did she leave me a love letter, she also left behind a self-portrait." Jiang Qing unfolded a picture of a person and lifted it high up to show the audience. The picture clearly depicted a woman dressed in revealing clothes, using ink to highlight the private parts of her daughter's body. This kind of picture made Muron Wanqing, who was also a girl, feel extremely embarrassed and indignant. In the direction of the sea returning sect, a female disciple covered her face and ran away crying. Do you know what's funniest? Jiang Qing took out more than 30 letters from his arms and threw them at Muron Wanqing's feet. These letters were all secretly given to me by the female disciples of the Haoran sect. Ha, isn't that ironic? As a disciple of the Profound Sky sect, I intend to severely injure the Haoran sect this time, but several dozen female disciples of the Haoran sect actually want to throw themselves at me. Sunset, don't you think it's very subversive? Shameless, simply too shameless. Luo Yuan and the others were so angry that their eyes turned red. Who wrote those letters? Open them all. I demand that the names of all the female disciples who secretly wrote to Jiang Qing be made public. One of the spectators shouted. Following that, the audience of the movie shouted in unison, all of them open. All of them open. Jiang Qing smiled faintly, there are at least 2,000 letters here. I don't have the time to open them one by one. If you want to read them, you can read them yourself. As he spoke, Jiang Qing waved his hand and all the letters flew down the arena. The release of these letters could be said to be a heaven-shaking scandal. If all the names were to be made public, it would cause quite a stir. Muron Wanqing was quick-witted as she slashed down with her sword. The sword light immediately turned into flames, burning all the letters to ashes. Sunset, what are you doing? Luo Yuan clenched his fists and said angrily, why did you destroy the letter? You should have all these letters publicized so that those shameless women would be scolded by the world. Jiang Qing spread out his hands and said, there's no need to be angry. I'm just showing you the reality. Those female audience disciples are outwardly filled with righteous indignation towards me, but they want to throw themselves at me in their hearts. Because they know that the Profound Sky sect will win, they want to please me in advance. This is very normal. Jiang Qing shrugged his shoulders. Men aren't bad, women don't love them. They don't care about justice or sect honor. They just want the best man in their hearts. What bullshit love! In front of a cruel life, it is simply unable to withstand a single blow. Have you said enough? Murong Wanqing pointed her sword at Jiang Qing and shouted, "Come and die if you've said enough." Jiang Qing bowed to Murong Wanqing and said, "I have always asked about the reputation of the Murong clan. I have another mission with me this time. Please report it to the noble clans after you return. My 9 firmament continent will always be open to the Murong clan. I hope that the Murong clan will be able to enter the embrace of the 9 firmament continent." "You're delusional." Murong Wanqing stabbed at Jiang Qing with her sword. "My the Murong clan and Blue Tide continent live and die together. I will never do that shameless thing. Don't worry." Jiang Qing drew out his sword and neutralized Murong Wanqing's attack. He smiled playfully and said, "The businessman is always pursuing benefits. Where there is benefit, there is home. We are indeed businessmen, but we also know what it means to have a country destroyed, a rabbit killed and a fox saddened." Murong Wanqing swung her sword, and sword shadows separated around the sword. Those sword shadows formed a circle, and there were a total of 16 of them. As Murong Wanqing's sword slashed down, the 16 sword shadows that surrounded Jiang Qing immediately slashed down. Jiang Qing slammed his palm onto the ground, and a wave of cold energy surged out, freezing all the sword shadows. "You're saying this because you have no idea how difficult it is to survive in such a cruel world." Chapter 319 Song of Ice and Fire. Luo Yuan was so angry that his mouth was trembling. He angrily said, "Those shameless women. They have no face to curry favor with Jiang Qing at this time." Xiang Nan patted Luo Yuan on the shoulder and said, "There is no need to be so angry. There are at least 50,000 to 60,000 female spectators, but there are only 1,000 to 2,000 to please Jiang Qing, right? In fact, there are still a lot of good girls. Furthermore, I have every reason to believe that many male disciples have secretly left letters for Jiang Qing. They want to follow Jiang Qing to the 9 firmaments continent." However, Jiang Qing's malicious intention was to expose the female disciple's letter to provoke us. There are always scum, but we can't kill everyone in one go. Wanqing understands this logic, that's why she burned those letters. Don't you understand? That's why we have to work harder to win. Let everyone know that they are worth staying in the Blue Tide continent. Luo Yuan was speechless by Xiang Nan's words. He didn't expect Xiang Nan to have so many. He only knew that he was very angry in his heart. However, reality had always been like this, never changing. On the arena. "Sunset, you and I know our roots, so don't waste time testing each other." Jiang Qing raised his sword, and a cold aura filled the sword. At this moment, the temperature on the arena began to drop rapidly. In an instant, a layer of frost formed on the surface of the sturdy arena. Murong Wanqing's right arm burst into flames, and the frost beneath her feet quickly melted. At this time, the arena was divided into 2 halves. Normally, the cold air was intense, while the other half was blazing hot and unbearable. Jiang Qing slashed out with his sword, and an icy sword light shot towards Murong Wanqing. Murong Wanqing counterattacked with a sword strike, and a flaming sword light shot towards her. The 2 sword lights collided in the air. The flaming sword lights and the ice-sealed sword lights immediately exploded. However, after the flaming sword lights disappeared, there was still a bit of the ice-sealed sword lights left and they continued to fly towards Murong Wanqing. Not too good. Sunset is 2 levels lower than Jiangcheng, Xiang Nan said. It's a huge disadvantage. Murong Wanqing's left hand formed a claw and grabbed the incoming ice-sealed sword light. The remaining ice-sealed sword light suddenly burned and quickly turned into white gas. The road to the ice peak. Jiangcheng stepped on the ground. Starting from the landing point, a blue ice road on the ground quickly froze and spread towards Murong Wanqing. Murong Wanqing jumped into the air, and the icy road actually rose from the ground, transforming into an icicle that climbed up, continuously chasing after Murong Wanqing. Murong Wanqing stepped on the icicle. Her feet burst out with anger, suppressing the ice road from rising. The sword in her hand slashed towards Jiangcheng from afar and shouted, "Fire bird!" This sword strike did not condense the sword light. Instead, it chopped out more than a dozen small flaming birds and flew towards Jiangcheng with flapping wings. Ice Sparrow. Jiangcheng also slashed down with his sword, and with a howl, an ice bird with 5 meters wide wings whistled out. The ice bird and the fire bird collided in the air and cancelled each other out. In the end, the dozen or so fire birds were extinguished. The 5-meter wide ice bird continued to fly towards Murong Wanqing with 2 meters left. Murong Wanqing made up a sword strike and burned it into white smoke. The little bird stood on Xiang Nan's head and pointed at the arena with the tip of its wings. "I know," Xiang Nan said, "the birds they released are all fake. You are the real one." Little Sparrow arrogantly raised her head, feeling a little more at ease in her heart. "It's sort of fun." Jiangcheng licked his lips. "Sunset, in fact, the person I like the most in my heart has always been you. When I take off the laurel of this joint exam, you can follow me to the 9 firmaments continent." Shameless. Murong Wanqing was furious. She raised her sword and a shockingly hot wave of fire pounced towards Jiangcheng. The temperature of the flames was so high that the air was twisted, causing people's line of sight to undergo a serious change. Women, aren't they the ones who like shameless men? The more shameless I am, the more you like them. Jiangcheng teased Murong Wanqing with his words, but he didn't show any mercy. Jiangcheng also raised his sword and picked up the cold wind that covered the sky and the earth. These cold winds were actually dark blue. The temperature was already incredibly low. The fire wave and the cold wind collided. The fire wave was quickly extinguished, and the cold wind also attenuated quite a bit. However, the remaining cold wind still pushed towards Murong Wanqing. Murong Wanqing hurriedly made up her sword, wanting to neutralize the remaining cold wind. Doing so meant that Murong Wanqing had to use 2 moves at a time to neutralize Jiangcheng's attack. Jiangcheng took the opportunity to take a slippery step around the core war zone, circling behind Murong Wanqing. He held a sword in his right hand and slashed out at Murong Wanqing's back with his left hand. He shouted, "En Cloud Frost Palm." An airball-shaped palm print flew towards Murong Wanqing. The palm print grew larger and larger, and by the time it reached Murong Wanqing's back, it was already more than 2 meters tall. Murong Wanqing had a cold wind in front of her and a cold palm behind her. She only had time to counteract the cold wind, but she was heavily slapped on her back by the cold palm. At this moment, Murong Wanqing's entire body began to freeze rapidly. Her eyes were slightly panicked, and she hurriedly circulated her yuan qi to resist the freezing body with flames. Soon, all the frost on her body was melted, but her expression was still ugly. Wanqing, our attributes are innately opposed to each other. What we compete with is a level of cultivation. You are not my opponent. Jiang Qing scampered around Murong Wanqing and said, "Do you think my ice palm is only going to freeze you? Do you feel a cold energy swiftly flowing through your meridians now? If you want to get rid of the cold energy in your body, you must use your power. Otherwise, you can only bring this cold energy to fight with me." What a sinister method! Shen Linhai said in shock. In a battle, where would there be time to do something? Murong Wanqing's face was ashen as she slapped Jiang Cheng's palm, fire cloud palm. A gigantic flame palm was pushed towards Jiang Cheng, but this flame palm was not solidified enough. The flames were loose, and it seemed that the cold energy in his body was causing trouble. Jiang Cheng blew out a mouthful of dark blue coldness as he faced the flame palm, immediately extinguishing the flame palm. Still refusing to submit, Jiang Cheng stabbed at Murong Wanqing, and a cold aura spurted out from the tip of the sword. Murong Wanqing counterattacked, and a pillar of fire sprayed out from the tip of the sword. The cold energy in the pillar of fire clashed, stalemated each other, and they were all trying to swallow each other up. However, Jiang Cheng, who was at a higher realm, clearly had a natural advantage. In addition to the cold energy flowing in Murong Wanqing's body, her fire attribute martial skill was unable to operate smoothly. Very quickly, the cold energy took the upper hand and began to push towards Murong Wanqing's direction, while the flame pillars were being suppressed to become shorter and shorter. Murong Wanqing decisively gave up fighting with Jiang Cheng's Yuan Qi. She soared into the air and slashed 7 times at Jiang Cheng. 7 streaks of flaming sword light pierced through the sky and flew towards Jiang Cheng. Jiang Cheng landed on the ground and a dark blue ice wall rose from the ground. 7 flaming sword lights struck the ice wall, leaving behind 7 deep sword marks, but they were unable to penetrate it completely. Jiang Cheng kicked down the ice wall. The ice wall shattered into countless tiny pieces of ice. The tiny pieces of ice melted into water droplets and scattered over Murong Wanqing's entire body. Jiang Cheng clenched his right hand and said, "Seal it for me." The traces of water on Murong Wanqing's body instantly froze. It froze her into an ice sculpture. Chapter 320 Song of Ice and Fire, 2. Shit, Sunset is going to be in danger. Save her. Luo Yuan patted Xiang Nan's back and said, "Hurry up and go." Xiang Nan remained unmoved and said, "Don't worry, there's still a long way to go." Luo Yuan was stunned for a moment, then became excited. Could it be that Sunset has a stronger method? On the arena, Jiang Cheng walked towards Murong Wanqing with his sword in hand and said, "Little sister Wanqing, I like a hot woman like you. You might as well follow me. If you agree, just blink your eyes. With your ability, you can still do it in the blink of an eye, right?" Murong Wanqing glared fiercely at Jiang Cheng. The fire in her body began to rise, wanting to melt the hard ice. Jiang Cheng placed the iron pillar in his left hand and continuously released cold air into it. "With me here, you will never be able to dissolve this ice in your lifetime. I advise you to make a quick decision. If you follow me, I will take you to the 9 Firmaments continent after winning the championship. I promise that I will treat you with all my heart and will not lust after you." Murong Wanqing's fire energy was not as strong as Jiang Cheng's. Not only did she not dissolve the ice on her body, the ice became thicker. Just as everyone thought that Murong Wanqing was going to fail, Murong Wanqing suddenly stopped and stopped using fire to melt the ice. "Oh. Have you given up? Are you really willing to follow me?" Jiang Cheng glared excitedly. Just as he finished speaking, Murong Wanqing's body began to shine. It was a blood-red flame. The flames were usually yellow, and the center of the flame was mostly pale green. However, Murong Wanqing's body burst out with blood-red flames. It was gorgeous and amazing. What? Jiang Qingyi was shocked. What kind of kung fu is this? Immediately after, the ice surrounding Murong Wanqing began to rapidly melt. No matter how hard Jiang Qing tried to release cold energy into the ice, he was unable to stop the ice from melting. Ka. After the ice was thinned to a certain extent, dense cracks appeared. Suddenly, the ice broke into pieces and Murong Wanqing soared into the sky. Boom! In the sky, Murong Wanqing's body emitted a loud explosion, causing a bang. Blood-red flames wrapped around her entire body. At this moment, Murong Wanqing's height had increased by nearly a third. Blood-colored flames weaved into a long flame dress, and a ribbon of flame wrapped around her arms and tangled around her back. Her long hair had also turned into fiery green threads. Murong Wanqing's figure was not bad, but she was only a green onion girl. But now, her figure and temperament had become like Su Caiyue's. She had a mature charm and temperament. Especially the long flaming skirt and long flaming hair that wrapped around her body, which made her look like a goddess of fire descending from the mortal world. That's... damn it! It's spiritual fire! Jiang Qing yelled unwillingly. Spirit fire? The entire audience was shocked. The elders of the various sects looked at each other and couldn't believe what they heard. The long sword in Murong Wanqing's hand had completely turned into a fire sword, and her realm had actually skyrocketed to the late stage of the four great origins of return. Immediately after, he continued to rise, jumping to the mid-fifth level of the origin return stage. This realm was already on par with Jiang Qing's. Jiang Qing, you should feel regret. Murong Wanqing's eyes were filled with disgust as she slashed at Jiang Qing. A ball of blood-red flames covered the sky and pounced towards Jiang Qing. Jiang Qing's body trembled as he roared, "Frozen heaven and earth!" Who? A wave appeared out of thin air on the arena. The waves rolled and swept towards the flames. The temperature quickly dropped, turning it into a dark blue wave of ice and frost. However, Murong Wanqing used the power of the spirit fire. The blood-red flame didn't even pause for a moment before it swallowed the waves. Peng threw himself onto Jiang Qing. Ha! Jiang Qing's entire body was on fire. He cried out with tears in his heart as he rolled back and forth on the ground. The cold qi in his body sprayed out one by one. However, spiritual flames were not something that could be extinguished by water. The so-called spiritual fire was a spiritual body bred from heaven and earth. Even in the deep sea, it could burn for thousands of years. Very quickly, Jiang Qing no longer struggled. He lay motionlessly on the ground, his entire body as black as charcoal. Did you win? The audience was so nervous that their palms broke out in sweat. Looking again, Jiang Qing, who was lying on the ground, suddenly flicked his finger. Ha! Murong Wanqing frowned, haven't you burned to death? Immediately after, Jiang Qing jumped up from the ground. His entire body was severely burned, and his handsome face was also burned beyond recognition. It was extremely frightening. Ah! Murong Wanqing, you ruined my face. Jiang Qing was so furious that he roared, I wanted to save your life, but you forced me to do so. Jiang Qing drew a circle with both of his hands, and 2 strands of cold energy flowed along with his palms. The temperature on the arena dropped once again. 6 ENG techniques. Jiang Qing roared, his entire body covered in a layer of purple frost. Purple ice. The contestants under the arena retreated one after another. The temperature of the purple ice was already incredibly low, exceeding the young martial artist's understanding of cold energy. Murong Wanqing, go to hell. Jiang Qing raised his hands high up, and 10 purple icicles condensed above his head. Those icicles shot towards Murong Wanqing. Murong Wanqing slashed down with her sword. 10 spiritual fire sword lights shot towards her. Blood-colored flames and purple icicles collided in the air, canceling each other out. Xiang Nan's heart sank. This kind of technique must have been learned from the ancient martial tomb. Otherwise, no matter how powerful an ordinary cultivation technique was, it wouldn't be able to withstand the power of the spiritual fire. Frozen for 1,000 miles. Jiang Cheng's body shook. The entire arena was shrouded in cold air. Even the air was frozen to a strange pale purple color. The moisture in the air was constantly frozen and turned into pale purple ice chips that fell down. Even the contestants standing outside the arena were unable to withstand the extreme cold and hurriedly used their skills to defend themselves from the cold. 10 referees formed a circle. It was impossible for them to deal with the cold energy and condense the Yuan Qi wall. They released a large amount of Yuan Qi, enveloping the entire arena and turning it into a hemispherical Yuan Qi barrier. Desolate world. Murong Wanqing raised her sword high, and a blood-red wave of flames surged out from the sword. At this moment, the dark purple coldness and blood-red heat fought against each other on the arena, causing half of the arena to be dark purple and the other half to be blood-red. Die! Jiang Qing pointed his sword at the ground and raised his sword, 6 ENG techniques, purple river wave. Hu! A violet ice A tornado rose from the ground. The A tornado roared as it chased after Murong Wanqing. This A tornado was mixed with countless violet ice blades. Murong Wanqing's long flaming hair fluttered in the wind. She raised her sword high in the air and twisted it rapidly. Within the spinning fire mark, a huge fireball suddenly dived down. The fireball was 10 meters in diameter, filled with blood-red flames, and fell into the A tornado. Boom! The cold air and flames exploded at the same time. The fireball disappeared, and the frost A tornado cancelled out. Novel Empire. Immortal God of Battle.